Chapter 499. Ninkei looked at the steep cliff under his feet and the beautiful waterfall under the starlight. He imagined the countless nights without starlight and could not help but feel a little cold. He looked at the headmaster and said, "If the underworld invasion happened many times in history, the alternation between the everlasting night and the everlasting day had happened many times. However, the human race did not go extinct. It could only mean that, like what you said earlier, some of the strongest and most determined people survive the long night. I just don't understand. Those who could survive the long night must have gone through a natural selection. The remaining people must be the most powerful cultivators. But why don't these people exist in the West Hill scriptures or the stories of the Buddhism sect?" The headmaster said, "You should have seen the stone statues of the venerables in the Wanyin Tower Temple. The venerables of the Buddhism sect are equivalent to the sages recorded in the Haotian Taoism scriptures. In the legends, these humans have almost infinite lifespans and extremely determined wills. That is why they have successfully survived the everlasting night and waited for the day when Haotian won again." Ninkei only learned about these powerful beings that had long been forgotten by the world tonight. He was extremely shocked and said, "These cultivators must be the most powerful humans. But why didn't they survive?" The headmaster said, "Almost infinite is not infinite. They can defeat the night, but they can't defeat the eternal time. Besides, in my opinion, these cultivators are far from being the most powerful." Ninkei felt that there was something wrong with the headmaster's words. In such a cruel and realistic everlasting night, the ones who could survive should be the most powerful. At this moment, the headmaster suddenly looked at him and asked, "Do you think cultivation is a gift from Haotian to humans?" This question was very sudden and seemed to have nothing to do with the conversation between the headmaster and the disciple. So Ninkei did not react for a moment. When he understood the question, he suddenly thought of how he inherited the youngest uncle's mantle and joined the Devil's Way at the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. He shook his head and said, "At least not all cultivators." The headmaster looked into Ninkei's eyes and said slowly, "A real cultivator cultivates his own heart and will eventually cultivate to the absolute self. That is absolute pride. They can hide around volcanoes like the venerables of the Buddhism sect and the sages of Haotian Taoism. They can survive on a small amount of moss and only need water. But how can they accept becoming a shivering mouse in the night? The more powerful the cultivator, the more unwilling they are. So when the everlasting night comes, they do not choose to hide. They choose to fight with Yama and die." Ninkei knew that the headmaster was right. How could someone like youngest Uncle kneel before Yama's throne or hide in a mouse hole? If the night really came in the future, second brother would definitely be the first to jump out and fight with Yama. Then, as the headmaster said, he would die. Thinking of that scene, thinking of the dark night in his dream, thinking that he might be the son of Yama, he felt that the night wind between the cliffs became colder and colder, and he suddenly had the urge to jump down. But he still had the headmaster, a pot of old wine, and some beef beside him. His life was still bright and beautiful, but Sang Sang was still sick. How could he bear to do that? He looked at the flowing clouds between the cliffs and asked blankly, "The hot sea is freezing, and the night in the far north is getting longer. These all indicate that the underworld is about to invade. Teacher, what should we do?" The headmaster held the small yellow clay pot and sighed. "I have been searching for decades in the world, but I still can't find the underworld. How can I know what to do? After all, cultivators compete with time. It's a pity that it's too late for me to see the scene of the last everlasting night." After saying this, he drank a mouthful of wine. His white eyebrows fluttered slightly, and a rare trace of worry appeared in his usually carefree expression. The West Hill Divine Palace is a follower of Haotian. They should know the most about the war between light and darkness. Didn't they make any preparations? Ninkei asked. Everyone can see the darkness at the end of the road, not to mention the followers of Haotian. The headmaster said, "Although I don't know what happened during the last underworld invasion, I think the followers of Haotian Taoism will fight with Yama with all their might for the glory of Haotian. If they can't defeat Yama, they will hide and save their lives. They will come again when Haotian defeats Yama." Ninkei said, "It sounds a little weak." The headmaster said, "They have always been weak people. Ninkei suddenly remembered what Lianxing 32 said when he was talking about the West Hill Divine Palace and the Jisho Abbey among the white bones at the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. He said, the Divine Hall is a group of dogs raised by the Jisho Abbey. So what if it's a shabby abbey? There are still dogs raised by Haoyan. Haha, they're all dogs. The headmaster said, the Devil's Doctrine appeared 1,000 years ago. The great divine priest of light who founded the Devil's Doctrine never experienced the everlasting night, so there is no way to deal with it in the doctrine of the Devil's Doctrine. Ninkei said, I heard that the Devil's Doctrine also worships Yama. The headmaster said, it's not faith, it's fear. The people in the Devil's Doctrine need an idol to resist the majesty of Haoyan. It's just psychological comfort. Ninkei thought of what Lotus had said before she died. After a moment of hesitation, he repeated it to the headmaster. Some people say that the Devil's Doctrine is a moss-covered stone that hides in the dark to avoid Haoyan's divine light. They say that they don't respect Haoyan, but they are actually very afraid of Haoyan. That's why Haoyan allows the existence of the Devil's Doctrine. In fact, there was another part of the sentence, but he cut it off. At that time, Lotus said that if Ninkei picked up the sword left by youngest uncle, he would lose all respect and even fear of Haoyan. That was the real Devil's Doctrine, and Haoyan would never allow such a person to exist. The headmaster's white eyebrows fluttered and he asked, who said that? Ninkei answered, Lianxing 32. The headmaster said, although Lotus is perverse and has some mental problems, he is still somewhat knowledgeable. Although it was dangerous for you to meet him, it was also a lucky chance. Although he had some mental problems, he was still somewhat knowledgeable. Ninkei did not know what to say. He thought that only the headmaster or youngest uncle were qualified to comment so casually on such a talented person like Lotus. The headmaster asked, what did Lotus say about the Buddhism sect? Ninkei said, he said that the Buddhism sect is only deliberately mystifying and is no different from fortune teller. He also hated the Buddhism sect's emphasis on self-cultivation. When faced with the transfer of fate, they could only wait humbly and could never reach the real nirvana realm. Does the transfer of fate refer to the underworld invasion? It should be. It sounds like Lotus is not only reasonable, but also knowledgeable. However, different schools and sects have their own origins. It is not appropriate for me to make such an overbearing comment. The headmaster said, according to the Buddhist scriptures a long time ago, when the Yueluan kingdom was not called Yueluan kingdom, the earliest Buddha knew about life and death. He was sad and confused and did not know how to extricate himself. He also foresaw the underworld invasion and the coming of the night. He was in unspeakable pain and did not know how to extricate himself. He traveled around and practiced self-cultivation. He sat under an osmanthus tree for 100 days and thought about how to extricate himself. He tried to make all living beings escape from death and forget the changes of day and night. Finally, the Buddha figured out a way. Ninkei asked curiously, what way? The headmaster looked at him and said with a smile, that way is to shut up. Ninkei thought that he had misheard and repeated subconsciously, shut up? The headmaster said, that's right. The Buddha's way is to teach all living beings to be silent and patient. They should treat everything around them as an illusion, such as wealth, pain, family, and separation. In this way, if they do not find joy in life, they will not feel pain in death. If they do not find joy in light, they will not feel pain in darkness. That's why I call this method shut up. Ninkei asked confusedly, what's the similarity? The headmaster said, if one does not cry out in pain after being beaten, does it mean that one needs to shut up? Ninkei was amused and praised. Teacher, you are indeed good at summarizing. Suddenly, he thought of Daosher monk who had died under his blade and Qin Yin, the world wayfarer of the Buddhism sect who came to Chang, and on a snowy night. He frowned and said, if the Buddhism sect is really particular about being patient, why are the monks of the White Tower Temple of the Yueluan Kingdom so evil, and why are there people from the Xiankong Temple who set foot in the mortal world? This is the result of the reverse Dharma. Back then, the Buddha figured out a method to shut up and passed it down. The disciples of the Buddhism sect really believed it. In this way, the more stable one's Buddhist heart is, the more determined one will be. So what if the underworld invasion is happening? So what if it is a long night? If they are not even afraid of death, why would they be afraid of darkness? On the other hand, if they are not even afraid of darkness, why would they be afraid of death? The headmaster smiled and said, the Buddhism sect is particular about avoiding the mortal world, but this does not mean that they cannot enter the mortal world. Once they enter the mortal world, they will be even more troublesome than the fanatics of the West Hill Divine Palace. Ninkei thought of what the headmaster had mentioned and asked curiously, if the Buddha could predict the underworld invasion countless years later, did he not predict the ending? The headmaster said, if the prophecy is useful, why are we still alive? This sentence was very meaningful. However, Ninkei's mind was filled with the big secrets related to the underworld invasion. How could he let the headmaster of the academy get over it with this profound sentence? He said, Teacher, this is not the attitude to tell a story. The headmaster was slightly annoyed and said, if you don't like my story, I will learn Buddhism. Ninkei was confused and asked, what do you mean? The headmaster said, shut up. Ninkei said helplessly, don't. The headmaster said, beg me. Ninkei said without hesitation, Teacher, I beg you. I just want to know what the Buddha's prophecy is. The headmaster of the academy suddenly realized that he finally had someone who was as shameless as him. He felt helpless and comforted at the same time. He stroked his beard and said, when the Buddha traveled around, he once went to the Jisho Abbey and was invited by the Abbey Dean to read the 7 tomes of Arcane. He felt the oracle of Hao Ian and wrote down what he had foreseen on the Ming hand scroll. Later, the great divine priest of light took the Ming hand scroll to the wilderness to establish the devil's doctrine. It had a lot to do with those words. The reason why the Yueluan kingdom was called Yueluan kingdom was also because of the prophecy in the Ming hand scroll. Ninkei said in surprise, there's a message from Buddha on the Ming hand scroll. The headmaster said, among the 7 scrolls of the tomes of Arcane, the most important is the Tian hand scroll. The most interesting one is the Ming hand scroll. As for the other scrolls, let's not read them. Ninkei suddenly thought of a possibility and asked, Teacher, have you read the 7 volumes of the tomes of Arcane? The headmaster answered matter-of-factly, of course. Let me tell you something serious. Recently, there have been cases of accounts being stolen. I have been reporting this to the website. Everyone, please pay more attention to your account security. In Qidian Security Center, you can use your mobile phone to authenticate, and you can set up consumer protection. There is also a very useful voucher conversion. I have been working on it. I want to make sure that you can only read books in Qidian when you top up your account. That way, at least you can't steal the game. Then, tomorrow is Saturday because I have to make up for the previous day's leave, so there will be updates. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 500. Ninkei's question was not about the tomes of Arcane. The Ming hand scroll had always been in the academy and the headmaster could read it any time he wanted, but about the 7 volumes. When Lotus was invited to the Jisho Abbey, he had only read 2 volumes of the tomes of Arcane. It was hard for him to imagine that there was someone in the world who had read the 7 volumes of the tomes of Arcane. So when he heard the headmaster's answer, he was shocked speechless. He thought that even if the headmaster was the greatest person in the world, the relationship between Haotian Taoism and the academy was so bad. How could the Taoists in the Jisho Abbey lend him the 7 volumes of the tomes of Arcane? The headmaster knew what he was thinking and said, I like reading. I really wanted to read the contents of the tomes of Arcane. I can't just stop reading because the Taoists refuse to let me. Ninkei understood the hidden meaning in the headmaster's words. He gasped and said, Did you break into the Jisho Abbey and force yourself to read the 7 volumes of the tomes of Arcane? What's the difference between that and a bandit? The headmaster was a little embarrassed and said, Books are the inheritance of knowledge. They should not be hidden deep in the mountains and not be read by others. How can reading be powerful? The 7 volumes of the tomes of Arcane, which were supreme in the eyes of the world, were no different from ordinary books in the academy, especially in the eyes of his headmaster. Since he wanted to read them, he had to read them. Thinking of this, Ninkei was shocked and proud. Being a Tang was something to be proud of. Being a disciple of the academy was even more so. Youngest uncle's reputation in the world, senior brother's occasional appearances in the mortal world, and especially the anecdotes about the headmaster that were unknown to the world had formed a very special atmosphere. No matter how shy and reserved one was, one would eventually become proud after staying in the atmosphere of the academy for a long time. Moreover, Ninkei had never been a shy and reserved person. He clicked his tongue in wonder and then remembered the question he wanted to ask. What was the message of the Buddha on the Ming hand scroll? The headmaster said, "As I said, you'll understand when you can understand the book." Ninkei then remembered that he had read the Ming hand scroll. Thinking of the unclear words on the tomes of arcane, such as the rotation of the sun and moon, he vaguely guessed that it was the message of the Buddha. He was even more curious about the prophecy. But how could he understand it at his current state? Whether it was the back of the mountain or the front yard of the academy, the learning atmosphere had always been free and casual. As the saying goes, one should not be ashamed to ask his subordinates. Ninkei was even more ashamed to ask his superiors. He said directly, "Teacher, I really don't understand." Ninkei was even more ashamed to ask the headmaster. The headmaster sighed and said, "Teacher, I really don't understand." Ninkei looked at his teacher's fluttering white eyebrows and was at a loss. He thought to himself, how could there be a language in this world that you don't understand? You're not an ordinary person. When the day enters, the night comes and the moon appears. The headmaster looked at the sky full of stars above the precipice and said, "The first sentence refers to the Dharma ending age mentioned by the Buddhism sect. The arrival of night means the underworld invasion. But what is moon? The Yuelan kingdom got its name from this. The moon must be a rotating object. You said a few words last year tonight, but who has seen it?" He turned to look at Ninkei and said, "The reason why I don't understand is because it is a prophecy. As I said before, if prophecies are useful, why are we still alive? Since we will live according to our own will, the prophecy may not come true. Since it may not come true, it may never appear in our world. Since it will never appear, how can we understand it?" This sentence was a little hard to pronounce, but Ninkei heard it clearly. He roughly understood his teacher's attitude towards the Ming hand scroll. After thinking for a moment, he asked, "Since the prophecy of the Buddhism sect is not important, why should I go to the Lang Temple?" The headmaster asked, "What is the Lang Temple most famous for? You should be a monk?" Ninkei thought about it in his heart, but he knew that he would be scolded by his teacher if he were to say such an answer. Suddenly, he recalled the rumors about Prince Longqing before he entered Chang, and thought about the important junctures in Master Lotus life. He asked in disbelief, "Is it the debate?" He had answered seriously and cautiously, but he did not expect that his answer would still make the headmaster extremely dissatisfied. The headmaster said angrily, "You talk and I'll talk. That's just a group of cultivators talking about love. They're just a bunch of cultivators messing around and fooling around with those mysterious scholars and Taoist priests. It's all Lotus and the little monk from the Lang Temple's fault for starting such a bad trend." Ninkei asked, "What is the Lang Temple most famous for?" The headmaster said, "What is written on the invitation card? The Lang Temple is most famous for the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival." Ninkei said unhappily, "Even if the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival is famous, what does it have to do with me?" The headmaster said, "The Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival is the Ghost Festival. It started countless years ago and originated from the legend of the underworld invasion. The most important part of it is to worship the ghosts. In the beginning, it was a ceremony for the human world to beg the underworld to come later. In other words, it was to send a message to the underworld, telling them to live a good life there and not to think about the human world." Ninkei was shocked when he realized that the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival was related to the legend of the underworld. The headmaster continued, "The Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival was originally a festival of Haotian Taoism. I don't know why, maybe the believers of Haotian Taoism felt that it was embarrassing for them to do such a thing, so it gradually evolved into a Taoist field with incense and Buddha's voice. However, as time passed, most people forgot the origin of this festival." Ninkei said, "If the underworld really wants to invade, how can they be sent away with just a few nice words? Besides, I think if the underworld really exists, the people there won't like to eat incense and candles. The headmaster slapped his thigh heavily and said, "Yes. Why do we need to cultivate if nice words work? That is why I've been thinking that the Taoist and Buddhist sects created this Yulan hungry ghost festival to use the light of Buddha to suppress the underworld." People would only slap their thighs when they were talking excitedly. The headmaster was also excited at this time. However, he thought that the action of slapping his thigh looked a little indecent and did not match his image of a high mountain. Therefore, he did not slap his own thigh, but slapped Ning Kei's thigh heavily. Feeling the burning pain from his thigh, Ning Kei's expression suddenly changed. He opened his mouth, but before he could cry out in pain, he heard the second half of his teacher's words and suddenly forgot the pain. Suppress the underworld. Is the entrance to the underworld in the Lank Temple? The headmaster did not notice his expression at all and said, "Countless Buddhist temples in the world have a Yulan hungry ghost festival, not just the Lank Temple. Moreover, I have been there many years ago and did not find any entrance to the underworld. You can go and look for it again this time. Maybe it will answer some of your questions." The headmaster spoke calmly and casually, but Ning Kei was shocked. Thinking of the words "suppress the underworld" made him feel uncomfortable all over. His skin itched terribly, as if some black smoke was about to seep out of his pores. The Buddhism sect was now suspecting that he was the son of Yama. If he went to the Lank Temple to participate in the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival, wouldn't he be suppressed by the light of Buddha? Will he be suppressed under the mountain for 500 years? There was a light mountain breeze between the cliffs, and the wisteria fruits hanging in the rain corridor swayed with the wind. They were shaped like copper bells, but there was no clear sound. Only a few light popping sounds could be heard as the ripe fruits fell to the ground and burst into juice. The unique fragrance of the wisteria, which was a mixture of fat and fresh, immediately filled the air. Ning Kei thought for a long time and plucked up his courage to ask, "Teacher, what is the son of Yama?" The headmaster looked at the night clouds in front of the master and disciple and said, "According to the records of the Xiankong Temple's Book of Light and the Ming Hand Scroll, Yama has 70,000 children. Every time the day and night alternates and before the underworld invasion, a son of Yama will come to the human world to foretell and guide the coming of the night." "Guide?" Ning Kei repeated in surprise. The headmaster said, "Of course, the coming of the night needs guidance, just like the light needs guidance. Of course, all these years, I have been thinking whether it is guidance or projection." Ning Kei lowered his head again and kept silent for a long time. It was not until the night grew darker and the starlight became dimmer and the night clouds between the cliffs became as black as ink that he said, "Teacher, if I am really the son of Yama, will you kill me?" The headmaster looked at him and smiled. He said matter-of-factly again, "Of course." Ning Kei raised his head and looked at him. His eyes were full of innocence and begging, like a kitten that had just opened its eyes and was extremely pitiful because of hunger and fear of the strange world. Everyone's life is unique. Even if all the lives in the world are added up, they are only as unique as my life. Teacher, you can't take it too hard. The headmaster looked at him and said seriously, "To exchange one's life for the safety of billions of people in the world, this is what a hero and a saint should do. If that day really comes, I hope you can kill yourself." Ning Kei naturally disagreed and said indignantly, "I have said that eldest brother is a benevolent person and second brother is a man of ideals. I am just a selfish person. I don't even want to be a man of ideals, let alone a saint. Teacher, you have gone too far by using such words to provoke me." The headmaster suddenly laughed out loud. Hearing the laughter, Ning Kei was a little helpless. The headmaster looked at him and said with admiration, "Not bad, not bad. Since you are a human, you should be a human. Why do you have to be a saint? You have thought it through. In my opinion, since you can think it right, I believe you will not do anything wrong in the future. I am very pleased, haha." In the night, the hearty and even arrogant laughter echoed between the cliffs and gradually disappeared. Ning Kei was still extremely helpless and did not know what to say. The headmaster looked at him and said with a smile, "The son of Yama needs to be defined, but it cannot be defined by humans. Only you can define it. Just like how humans are humans because we believe that we are humans. Only we can define humans, not how Ian or other beings. Ning Ke smiled bitterly and said, Teacher, what you said makes sense. I'm not flattering you. I really think it makes sense. But only you are qualified to say this. The headmaster said, I did not say this. It was your youngest uncle who said it. Go for the massage. Have a good weekend. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 501. So it was little Ant Master's words. Ning Ke looked at the faintest light in Chong and city in the distance. After a long silence, he asked, Teacher, do we really have to go to the Lang Temple? The headmaster said, It's up to you. But if you don't go, no one will be able to answer your doubts, not even me. And I always feel that this trip to the Lang Temple is your lucky chance. Ning Ke asked, What kind of lucky chance? I'm not a person who believes in destiny. The headmaster said, However, after seeing many things over the years, I gradually feel that my views are too stubborn. I have some new understandings. Fortuitous encounters are not something that is destined to happen by the heavenly Tao. Instead, some people living in this world, because of the ideals in their hearts, even a single thought will begin to affect the environment and people around them. In the end, it will affect the other party who is extremely far away. Until you meet them, the thoughts in your mind will turn into actual stories. Then, you will go back to the beginning of the story, and you will often find that what you want in the end is what you want. This is probably fate. The headmaster continued, Sang might be able to recover on her own, but it would be better if she could take a look at the little monk in the Lang Temple. You have inherited your youngest uncle's legacy, so you still need to learn some Buddhist Dharma to dilute the hostility. You have to figure out if you're the son of Yama, and you should go and see what the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival is all about. It is your lucky chance that you need to do all this. Ning Ke said absent-mindedly, It sounds like what the monks say, but I don't understand. The headmaster said, You'll understand if you listen more to the monks. Will it be dangerous? You'll get hit by a carriage while walking. Teacher, I'll take your words as a tacit agreement. Since when did I recognize him? Ning Ke withdrew his gaze from Chong and then looked down at his knees. He said, If even you think it's dangerous, what about me and Sang? The headmaster smiled and said, Without simmering it for 3 days and 3 nights, how can the Buddha jumps over the wall be achieved? If you don't, Ning Ke raised his hands and begged for mercy. He said painfully, I've heard what youngest uncle said so many times. Teacher, you don't have to say it again. The headmaster said, Let's go and take a look. We won't know until we see. Ning Ke sighed and said, The world is so wonderful. The headmaster said in surprise, I didn't expect you to receive it so well. What's good about it? There's a rhyme. I just feel bored. It was still windy tonight, and the cliffs were very gentle. However, Ning Ke was not in a relaxed mood. He asked with a gloomy expression, Teacher, you are a man of great ability. Can't you see the future? The headmaster said, The end of cultivation is time. Even though I have lived longer than ordinary people, I am not old enough to experience the last underworld invasion. I did not see what happened before the everlasting night. It is probably because of this that I cannot fully understand the Ming hand scroll. I do not know how this story will develop. Now that you're a character in this story, I do not know what changes will happen to you in the future, but I hope it will be good. Ning Ke asked, Are there still people in this world who experienced the last underworld invasion? In the past, he did not believe that cultivators could live for thousands or even tens of thousands of years. However, as he entered the back of the mountain of the academy and became more knowledgeable, he began to wonder if there was such a thing as immortality in the world. The headmaster said, I know 2 people who experienced the last everlasting night. Ning Ke did not expect that there would be such people. He asked in surprise, What kind of people? The headmaster seemed to have thought of something, and his expression became a little complicated. He said indifferently, A drunkard and a butcher, but they do not care about the affairs of the world. I am afraid they are not people. Ning Ke once again thought of the strange dreams he had. In one of his dreams, a drunkard and a butcher appeared. They stood beside him and stared at him. In another dream, The headmaster snatched the wine bag from the drunkard's hand and drank a mouthful. Then he snatched a pig's hind leg from the butcher's back and took a bite. Could the headmaster be talking about those two people? Ninkei was shocked and said, "Teacher, do you really not want to hear my dream?" The headmaster looked at him and said with a smile, "Do you still not understand? That is your own dream after all." At this point, Ninkei finally understood what the headmaster meant. Any story needed to be advanced in order to know the future development. Any scene had to be seen with one's own eyes in order to know what color it was. Whether one was the son of Yama or what would happen in the future, one had to walk in the story and then choose. In other words, one was the author. The headmaster floated away. Only Ninkei was left on the dark cliff. Looking at the night sky and the flowing clouds, he thought of what Master Lotus said to him before he died and frowned. "You have joined the devil. If you want to cultivate the devil, you must first cultivate the Buddha. Then please walk bravely into the night. Although you have no chance of success and may die as soon as you start on the road, I still wish you well and curse you." He silently repeated these words, then stood up and waved his hand at the darkness that occupied his entire field of vision, saying, "If you really are the Netherworld King, if I really am your son, then please remember that when teacher can't protect me, you must protect me a little." In the West Hill, on the lush spring peach mountain, the black divine hall of judgment exuded a cold and murderous aura. The hall was extremely spacious. Hundreds of priests in red robes and deacons in black kneeled on the smooth and flat ground, looking like a red flower in the dark night on the ground. The priests and deacons had been kneeling for a long time and their knees were already aching. But no one dared to get up or even look up. They looked down at their own reflections on the smooth floor of the divine hall and saw the humble expressions on their faces. Even they could not understand why they were so humble. A deep fear from the bottom of their hearts made their bodies stiff. As a result, the red flower in the dark night on the ground became a little rustling. Instead of feeling beautiful, it could only make people feel cold and bloody. For countless years, the judicial department of the West Hill Divine Palace had been like this. People in the judicial department dealt with horrible punishments all day long and believed in the principle that the strong would always be strong. So no one was unfamiliar with this atmosphere. The Divine Hall of Judgment did not change much. It was still empty and cold. The blood-like seat of heavenly black jade was still there. But the bead curtain in front of the seat of heavenly black jade had been broken into bead powder in the battle a few days ago and could no longer be repaired. In the end, it was swept into the garbage by the handymen and disappeared. The bead curtain had been in the Divine Hall of Judgment for many years and added a lot of mysterious and horrible aura to the powerful man on the seat of heavenly black jade. People were used to the existence of the bead curtain. Now they had to get used to the bead curtain because the powerful man on the seat of heavenly black jade was dead. Now sitting on the seat of heavenly black jade was a young and beautiful girl. Of course, in the eyes of the subordinates of the judicial department, the girl's body now had some kind of divinity. Because they could not look at her directly, they did not have the concept of beauty in the secular world. She represented power and horror. After a long time, Yi Hongyu sat on the seat of heavenly black jade with her hands supporting her chin. She remained silent and expressionless. She was extremely calm, which made her look extremely cold. When she did not speak, the entire Divine Hall of Judgment did not dare to make any sound. All the divine priests and deacons knelt on the ground and did not dare to look up. They did not even dare to guess what was going on. Some timid people clenched their teeth in fear and found that the sound was so clear that they almost fainted. Yi Hongyu looked at the people who knelt respectfully in front of the seat of heavenly black jade and listened to their nervous and frightened breathing. She recalled what she had seen and experienced over the years. There was a faint sense of mockery and disgust in her beautiful eyes. She even felt a little tired. A divine priest walked in from the side of the divine hall and bowed respectfully in front of the seat of heavenly black jade. Yi Hongyu waved her hand in annoyance. The divine priest opened the thick dossier and looked at the people who knelt in fear in front of the seat of heavenly black jade. He said expressionlessly, "The merciful and majestic Haoyan has guided people out of the dark wilderness. The apostles with sharp swords have broken the ice in the ancient river and stand in front of the bonfire to announce to the people, Like the change of dynasties in the secular world, the inheritance of the great divine priest of judgment would always set off a storm of blood. As the indifferent voice of the divine priest sounded, 14 red-robed divine priests and deacons in black were dragged out of the divine hall of judgment. There were sounds of axes chopping and cries from time to time outside the hall. These 14 divine priests and deacons were the staunch supporters of the former great divine priest of judgment. Some of them had to die. They might have to live to continue to contribute to the West Hill Divine Palace. The dead should be rejoiced because the living would spend the rest of their lives regretting their foolishness when the Tao addict lost her power. The divine priest's voice echoed in the empty divine hall of judgment. As the names were called out one by one, the subordinates of the judicial department who knelt on the ground became more and more frightened. No one knew if their name would be called. Only the commanders of cavalrymen of divine hall in black and gold armor who knelt in the middle seemed relatively calm. The commanders of cavalrymen of divine hall were directly under the jurisdiction of the judicial department. But after the death of Prince Long Qing 2 years ago, the power of personnel and punishment of cavalrymen of divine hall was transferred from the hierarch lord to the commander of the divine guards, Luo Kadi. And these commanders believed that although they were not respectful to the current great divine priest of judgment, they were not those powerless divine priests who only knew how to read scriptures. They were powerhouses in the see-through state. The judicial department was very realistic. As long as one had enough power, he could redeem the corresponding sins and be qualified to continue living. After all, the West Hill Divine Palace ruled the world by executors like them. However, what no one in the temple expected was that the priest's gaze finally landed on the gorgeous black and gold armor of these cavalry commanders. He then slowly read out their names. ZMO, Yuan Jun, Lu Shao. Hearing their names, the commanders of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall could not suppress their fear and bewilderment. They raised their heads and looked at the seat of heavenly black jade one after another. However, they found that the girl sitting on the seat of heavenly black jade was supporting her chin with her hands and eyes closed, as if she had fallen asleep. The cavalry commander named ZMO was the most qualified and the most powerful among them. He looked at his colleagues who were frightened but did not know what to do. He shook his head and slowly stood up, patted his knees, looked at the girl on the throne, and asked slowly why. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 502. Other than the broken bead curtain that day, the Divine Hall of Judgment had been free of dust for many years. Of course, that did not include the fine sand in the depths of the stone cracks, which could only be forced out by the horrible aura of the seat of heavenly black jade. But at least kneeling on the ground for a while would not touch any dirt. That was why Commander ZMO stood up and patted his knees. He did not really want to get rid of any dust. He just wanted to express his contempt for the girl in the seat of heavenly black jade to regain his confidence, so that he would not be crushed by the majesty of the seat of heavenly black jade again. There were 10 teams of cavalrymen from the Divine Hall of West Hill. Each team had a commander. Commander ZMO had long entered the upper state of see-through and was as famous as Chunbachi. Of course, he knew that he was no match for Yi Hongyu. But he had to stand up because he did not want to die. Yi Hongyu blinked and slowly opened her eyes. She looked at the man in front of the seat of heavenly black jade without any expression on her face. Before she could speak, she frowned and coughed painfully. A maidservant nervously walked to the seat of heavenly black jade and handed her a silk handkerchief that was as white as snow. Yi Hongyu took the handkerchief and gently wiped her lips. 2 red plum blossoms appeared on the white handkerchief. Everyone in the Divine Hall of West Hill knew that Yi Hongyu was seriously injured, including these powerful commanders. But even though the judicial department had always followed the law of the jungle, no one dared to take advantage of her injury because no one had the confidence. When Yi Hongyu broke the bead curtain and killed the former great divine priest of judgment, everyone in the Divine Hall thought that she would take over the position of great divine priest of judgment. But to everyone's surprise, after closing her eyes and resting for a moment, she walked down from the seat of heavenly black jade and walked towards the white divine temple at the highest point of Peach Mountain. Under the astonished gazes of countless people, she severely injured Luo Kadi, the commander of the divine guards, with one strike. If not for the hierarch's order, she would have killed that person. Few people in the world could kill the great divine priest of judgment and then the commander of the divine guards. Even if they could do it, they probably wouldn't dare to do it. Logically speaking, even if Yihong broke through to the knowing destiny state, she wouldn't be able to do it. But she dared to do it and actually succeeded. The image of the indigo robe flying on the Peach Mountain would forever remain in the memory of everyone in the Divine Hall. That battle had completely established the status of the indigo robe girl in the Divine Hall. From that day on, no one in the Divine Hall of Judgment would dare to challenge Her Majesty. ZMO did not dare to be picky, even if he saw her coughing up blood and knew that she was seriously injured this time. After defeating the terrifying Great Divine Priest of Judgment and the powerful commander Luo Kadi, the girl on the throne did not die and only suffered some injuries. This definitely did not mean that she was weak. It only meant that she was indescribably powerful. Yihong held her chin and looked at him quietly. She said softly, "Kneel." At this time, the priests and deacons who were still kneeling on the ground of the Divine Hall couldn't help but look at each other when they heard these two words. They naturally remembered the scene when the great divine priest walked into the Divine Hall that day, and recalled that they had once enthusiastically shouted for him to kneel down, and their expressions suddenly became extremely strange. The divine priests and deacons understood the fear and thoughts in each other's eyes. They raised their heads and pointed to the only standing commander ZMO. They shouted angrily, "Kneel! Kneel! Kneel!" Hundreds of people shouted in unison, their voices rumbling like thunder, echoing in the empty Divine Hall of Judgment. Their expressions were so angry that their spittle flew everywhere. Their voices were a little hoarse, and their facial features were distorted. They looked like a group of fanatical lunatics. Yihong looked at them calmly. She was a little satisfied and a little tired. Zemo's face became paler and paler, and his body became stiffer and stiffer. He couldn't even maintain his balance and swayed like a weak patient. Hearing the thunderous scolding coming from beside him, Zemo looked at his colleagues who were usually gentle and even flattering, but now had become so cold and angry. "Why?" He asked the question again, but he was not as calm as before. He even deliberately had a trace of disrespect, and his eyes were full of a pitiful look. The divine priest closed the thick file and looked at ZMO and the cavalry commanders who were kneeling on the ground and begging for mercy. He scolded them coldly. "How dare you? You are the generals of the Divine Hall, but you have fallen so low. The great divine priest thought that you have made some small contributions to the judicial department and showed mercy. He did not take your bodies, but only stripped you of your duties and cultivation and demoted you to commoners. You are not grateful for God's grace, but how dare you talk here? If they were not stripped of their bodies, they would not be beheaded." However, as the cavalry commanders of the West Hill Divine Hall, ZMO and the others had helped the judicial department hunt down the remnants of the devil's doctrine and search for heresy. They had done many things, and many people wanted them dead. If they were really stripped of their cultivation and chased out of Peach Mountain, they would lose the protection of the West Hill Divine Hall. What kind of miserable ending would they face? Hearing this, Zemo's body shook even more, and he almost fell to the ground. He looked at the girl on the throne and shouted in horror, "Only Commander Luo has the authority to punish us. Great Divine Priest, you have overstepped your authority. Aren't you worried that the Hierarch Lord will be angry?" Yihong slowly sat up and looked at him expressionlessly. She said, "Commander Luo Kadi is now sick in bed, so the Hierarch Lord has returned your authority to me." Luo Kadi, the commander of the West Hill Divine Hall Divine Guards, was a grand cultivator who had entered the knowing destiny state many years ago. How could such a person be sick? Everyone knew that the real reason Commander Luo Kadi was sick in bed was not because of illness, but because he was seriously injured by Yihong. Thinking of this, the people of the judicial department felt a chill in their hearts. The thunderous scolding in the Divine Hall gradually disappeared. Zemo's face became paler and paler. He stood there in a daze and said in a hoarse voice, "Great Divine Priest, please tell us what sins we have committed." The Divine Priest looked serious and was about to scold him again. At this moment, Yihong raised her hand. The Divine Priest immediately shut up and humbly retreated to the side of the seat of heavenly black jade. Yi Hongyu quietly looked at ZMO and the cavalry commanders for a long time. There was dead silence in the divine hall of judgment. Yi Hongyu suddenly smiled and said calmly, "You know very well that all sins are fake. The reason why I want to expel you from the divine hall is very simple. It is because you once looked at me in that way, so I don't want to see you again." ZMO suddenly understood. Last spring, Yi Hongyu was weak because she had fallen into a lower realm. The whole divine hall was rumored that Commander Luo Kadi had obtained the approval of the Hierarch Lord and was ready to propose marriage to her. Under such circumstances, the cavalry commanders led by Chen Bachi gradually looked at her differently. Some of them showed greed like Chen Bachi, some showed pity as if they were admiring a weak beauty, and some looked at her as if she were their sister-in-law. There was no hostility in these gazes, and not all of them were malicious. However, when those gazes fell on the great divine priest of judgment, then they all deserved to die. ZMO was desperate. He looked down at the smooth floor of the divine hall and said with a faint smile, "We have made so many contributions to the divine hall. Do we have to die just because we looked at her a few more times? We deserve to die just because we looked at her a few more times." Yi Hongyu said with a smile, "If you had not made some contributions to the judicial department, do you think I would let you leave Peach Mountain alive?" ZMO looked at her on the seat of heavenly black jade and said in a trembling voice with the last glimmer of hope, "Great divine priest, we are still of some use. Our cultivation can still help the divine hall. No, help you do something. It is a pity that we are crippled like this. Please give us a chance to atone for our crimes." Yi Hongyu was a little tired. She rested her chin on her hand and said, "I have said that you are not guilty. How can you atone for your crimes? I just don't want to see you." The priest walked forward again and looked at the cavalry commanders. He said calmly, "You will receive your punishment later. Great divine priest has compassion on you and has specially given you an old horse to plow the fields and 100 taels of silver to settle down." Inside the divine hall of judgment, hundreds of people knelt on the ground, trembling. No one dared to obey. ZMO slowly clenched his fists, and the commanders beside him could not help but look up. Yi Hongyu did not even look at them. The priest looked at them as if he did not see their emotional changes. He continued to say expressionlessly, "In the future, if you step into the West Hill Divine Kingdom, you will die. If you dare to mention that you have served the Divine Hall, you will die. If you hold a grudge and speak nonsense, you will die." ZMO looked around. It was silent. After the commanders heard the cruel verdict, they did not dare to look him in the eye. After a long time, the struggling expression on his face turned into a strong self-mockery. He sighed sadly and slowly knelt on the ground, accepting the cruel punishment in pain and speechlessness. The side of the divine hall of judgment lit up with a holy and cold light. Zemo's painful and angry beast-like howls and the cavalry commander's painful cries rose one after another. They had worked hard for half of their lives and finally entered the see-through realm. They had become real powerhouses. But today, their cultivation was destroyed, and they became ordinary people who were even worse than ordinary people. Gradually, the black divine hall of judgment became calm and even colder and scarier. The empty divine hall was so quiet that it did not seem to belong to the human world. Yi Hongyu sat on the blood-colored seat of heavenly black jade, looking calm. The seat of heavenly black jade was very big, and it should not be comfortable to sit on it. But she was very comfortable sitting on it. The trusted priest knelt in front of the seat of heavenly black jade and advised in a low voice, "Great divine priest, ZMO and the others are indeed very powerful. And from their previous performance, you can look forward to their loyalty to you. It would be a pity to cripple them and expel them from the divine hall." And Commander Luo, Yi Hongyu slightly lowered her head on the seat of heavenly black jade. She rested her chin on her hand, as if she had fallen asleep. "Luo Kadi is just a loser. One day, I will kill him. Since that is the case, why should I care about his feelings? And no one can see that the world is changing. It will change into a world that many people are unfamiliar with. In that world, even grand cultivators in the knowing destiny state can be killed at any time. Any idea of relying on cultivators in the see-through state is so ridiculous. In the late spring of the 16th year of the Tianqi era of the Tang Empire, and the 3447th year of the Great Rule of West Hill, 7 commanders of the cavalrymen of the Divine Hall were destroyed by the new Great Divine Priest of Judgment, Yi Hongyu, and were expelled from the Divine Hall. They were forbidden to step into the West Hill Divine Kingdom again. These once glorious commanders led an old and skinny horse, with 100 taels of silver in their pockets, and walked down the Peach Mountain with their squires like stray dogs. In the records of the West Hill Divine Palace, the crimes of these 7 cavalrymen were very vague. There was only one word: depravity. Therefore, they had a shameful nickname, Fallen Knights. And people in the West Hill Divine Palace knew very well that the reason why these cavalrymen were so severely punished was because they took an extra glance at the girl in the crowd last spring. It's really painful to save manuscripts. Please vote for me on Monday to relieve my pain. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 503. Trash. Scum. Get out. In the depths of the West Hill, in the cliffs covered by green vines, horse curses full of resentment and violence were heard. The curses were sharp and unpleasant, like sharp swords that could pierce through countless layers of armor. For some reason, they were tightly sealed around the cliffs and did not leak to the outside world. The green vines suddenly became chaotic. A figure flew out from the deep cave and fell heavily on the stone platform. It was a young man in an old Taoist robe. After a long time, he finally woke up and struggled to get up. He held the green vines on the cliff and coughed painfully. Blood spattered from his lips and soon dyed the front of his Taoist robe red. He looked extremely miserable and pitiful. The Taoist was Long Qing. He grabbed the green vines and rested for a while. After confirming that his injury was not serious, he walked to the edge of the cliff, picked up the bucket and the box, and continued to walk to the caves above the cliff. There was no fear or resentment in his calm eyes. He did not even look back at the deep cave. These days, he climbed the cliff covered with green vines every day and dealt with the seriously injured old Taoists in the caves. He deeply felt the violent and horrible temper of these abnormal people. After being humiliated so many times, he naturally became numb. After being injured so many times, he became more and more aware of the huge gap between him and the old Taoist. There was no resentment or revenge. Although the disabled old Taoists in the caves did not have a good face to Long Qing and could order him around, they knew that if they wanted to know the news of the human world in time and keep in touch with the outside world, they could not kill Long Qing directly. Therefore, they still had a sense of propriety. They made Long Qing suffer, but did not affect his action. However, there were many caves in the cliff, and there were many disabled old Taoists. Everyone thought that they had a sense of propriety, but when they came together, no one knew where their propriety went. Long Qing's injuries in each cave were not serious, but after so many days and so many caves, his injuries were getting worse by the day. Because of his injury, Long Qing moved much slower. It was almost dusk when he finished the day's work and returned to the Taoist temple. The warm and red setting sun shone on the simple Taoist temple from the other end of the West Hill Mountains. He stood in front of the hut by the lake and looked at the beautiful scenery without any expression on his face. The middle-aged Taoist walked slowly to his side and looked at the surface of the lake in the twilight. He did not explain to him the identity of the old Taoists in the caves, but said indifferently, "The more beautiful a place is, the fewer people there are." Long Qing bowed to the middle-aged Taoist and asked, "Uncle Master, are there always so few people in the monastery?" From the South Sea to the Jishou Abbey, Long Qing did not see anyone other than the 3 martial uncles. The simple and beautiful Taoist temple was shrouded in silence. 10 years ago, when Pippi and the little girl were still here, the monastery was much livelier. But then everyone left, and Yisu only came back occasionally, so the monastery inevitably became a little lonely. The middle-aged Taoist said, "But I heard that the little girl has inherited the position of the Great Divine Priest of Judgment, and the Great Divine Priest of Light and the Great Divine Priest of Revelation will probably be replaced. Then, the monastery will be lively for a few days." The hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace, the three great divine priests, the nation master of Tang, and people like Master Yinsei all needed to be baptized by Hao Yi in the Jishou Abbey before they could be awarded the position of great divine priest. Long Qing knew this story, but he could not help but feel a little lost when he thought that Yi Hongyu had already reached this step. The Holy Land in the hearts of the disciples of Hao Yi in Taoism, the legendary unknown place in the cultivation world, turns out to be such a simple and even boring Taoist temple. Is a little different from what you imagined? Long Qing shook his head and said, since it is unknown, we can't imagine it. We can only know by seeing it with our own eyes. No, even if we live here, we may not know. The middle-aged Taoist looked at him with a smile and said, it's good that you can understand this. The Jishou Abbey is a place outside the world, so it can be simple, quiet, and even lonely. If you really think that the Jishou Abbey you see is the Jishou Abbey, then you're stupid. The Taoists living in that mountain are the Jishou Abbey. The West Hill Divine Palace is the Jishou Abbey. The Abbey Dean is the Jishou Abbey. You and I are the Jishou Abbey, and the whole Haoyin Taoism is the Jishou Abbey. As long as the light of Haoyin shines, is the Jishou Abbey. Before you came to the Jishou Abbey, you were already in the Jishou Abbey. The middle-aged Taoist's words seemed a little profound, but Long Qing at least understood the first sentence. The disabled old Taoist priests living in the cave were unknown in the world, but their cultivation states were extremely terrifying. Some of them had obviously surpassed the 5 states and become the legendary sage in the scriptures. Such a Jishou Abbey was indeed a great place that was hard to imagine. I know very well how bad the temperament of the old guys living in the cave is. Since you are injured, you don't need to bear it. Although it is good for your temperament, it will damage your Taoist body and eventually become an obstacle to your future cultivation. Later, you can go to the pharmacy to make some medicine. The middle-aged Taoist looked at him and said. Long Qing seemed to inadvertently think of something and asked, Uncle, when I was tidying up the medicine warehouse a few days ago, I saw a medicine tripod. I wonder if I can use it? The middle-aged Taoist's eyes revealed an expression of appreciation and said, it seems that you have learned something from cultivating the Sha hand scroll. Your mind is not confused by the complicated cultivation methods, and you can even notice the medicine refining method recorded in the corner. Maybe this is your blessing. If you want to use the medicine tripod, just use it and wash it clean afterwards. The medicine warehouse of the Jishou Abbey was not located by the lake, but on the cliff to the west. It was a 2-story Taoist temple building with complicated talisman characters carved between the pillars and painted with gorgeous patterns. It gave off a sense of nobility and looked more like the main hall of a Taoist temple compared to the huts worshipping the 7 tomes of arcane by the lake. In front of the Hall of Medicine was a large meadow slope. Below the slope was a precipice. The precipice was so deep that even apes and monkeys could not climb it, let alone ordinary people. Even if the world's amazing grand cultivators could climb this precipice, they would be instantly killed by the array hidden in the meadow. Long Qing looked at the meadow that seemed to be burning in the twilight and felt the faintly discernible power of the array. After a moment of silence, he turned and walked to the Hall of Medicine. He held a big old iron ring in his hand, on which there were many seemingly ordinary keys. Without these keys, it was impossible for him to enter the Hall of Medicine. The door of the Hall of Medicine slowly opened, revealing a vast space that did not match the appearance of the hall at all. Several rows of array racks stretched into the depths of the hall. It seemed to be a few miles away, with no end in sight. There were countless rare medicines and raw materials placed on the array racks. Each medicine and material had a corresponding array to provide suitable ventilation in a warm and humid environment. These medicines and materials were rarely seen in the world. Many of them were even marked as missing in the West Hill scriptures. If they were to enter the world, it would probably attract countless cultivators to fight for them. However, there were too many kinds of rare medicines and materials here, but they seemed so ordinary. They were casually placed on the array racks and seemed to have been there for many years, with no one paying attention to them for many years. It was hard to imagine, but it was easy to understand. Whether it was the emperor of the South Jin Kingdom or the monarch of the Kingdom of Song, they had to bow before the West Hill Divine Palace. No matter if they were poor or rich, they had to offer their wealth to the West Hill Divine Palace. This meant that all the wealth and resources in the world belonged to the West Hill Divine Palace. In the words of Master Lotus, the West Hill Divine Palace was a group of dogs raised by the Jisho Abbey. The West Hill Divine Palace plundered all the wealth and resources in the world. Other than maintaining the rule of Hao-Ian Taoism over the world, the most precious things were naturally sent to the Jisho Abbey. From this point of view, what the middle-aged Taoist said earlier was right. The world that was enveloped by the light of Hao-Ian belonged to the Jisho Abbey, except for the country called Tang. Longqing had been in charge of cleaning up the entire Jisho Abbey these days. He also had to come to the Hall of Medicine every day to pick out the medicines that the terrifying old Taoist in the cave needed. He was already very familiar with this place, so he was not as shocked as he was when he first entered. He carried the key and walked into the depths of the hall, not even glancing at the medicines on both sides. Anyone could develop such a state of mind after living in the mountains of gold and seas of jade. However, when Longqing walked to the deepest part of the Hall of Medicine and walked to the hollowed-out sandalwood door, his expression became solemn. Behind the hollowed-out sandalwood door was the most important place in the Hall of Medicine, where some of the most precious materials and medicines were stored. He had never entered before because he did not have the key to this door. The medicine tripod that Longqing needed was right outside the door. He had seen it once through the wooden door a few days ago. Today, he asked tentatively and did not expect to receive permission from the uncle. He found the simplest key on the big iron ring and inserted it into the lock. There was a slight click, and the sandalwood door slowly opened. Longqing walked in and began to look for the medicinal materials he needed. Most of the materials for the medicine he was going to make were in the main hall. Only two of the most important materials should be stored here. Therefore, he was very cautious and even a little nervous. The medicine he was going to make was called the Earth-Sitting Pill in the Sha hand scroll of the Tomes of the Arcane. In addition to curing the injuries left by the old Taoist priest these days, more importantly, it could stabilize his ocean of qi and mountain of snow that had been forcibly repaired by the Abbey Dean. In other words, this kind of pill could make his cultivation go more smoothly. A pill with such an effect was, of course, extremely precious. In the records of the West Hill, it was even described as the supreme elixir that could heal the dead. Longqing had never imagined that one day he would have the opportunity to make such an elixir. Therefore, his nervousness at this time was understandable. All of a sudden, the nervousness on Longqing's face was replaced by shock. He did not find the medicinal materials needed to make the earth-sitting pill. But among those bottles and jars, he saw a crystal-clear small porcelain bottle made of unknown materials. There was a very faint smell of medicine coming from the small porcelain bottle. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qijian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 504. The Lang Temple was far away in the southeast. It was a long journey, and no one was willing to make time too tight. Therefore, even though the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival was held in autumn, most of the tourists and diplomatic corps of the Tang Empire who were preparing to participate in the festival chose to set off in early summer. The Academy was the first to receive the invitation from the Lang Temple and sent Ning Ke as their representative. Sang Sang, who had recovered, followed him as well. Their departure time was today. Other than the eldest brother who had to travel with the headmaster of the Academy, the disciples of the back mountain of the Academy rarely appeared in the world. These idiots would only feel happy if they stayed in their own world. For them, the back mountain was big enough, and there was no need for them to stir up trouble in the mortal world. Based on this belief, they did not envy their youngest brother who needed to cultivate in the mortal world. Instead, they sympathized with him. Therefore, when Ning Ke set off, just like when he went to the wilderness 2 years ago, all the senior brothers and sisters came to see him off and gave him small gifts to comfort him. Fourth brother and sixth brother often designed and made good things for Ning Ke, so they did not give him anything special this time. It was just an inconspicuous box. Ninth brother Beigong and 10th brother Shimin were still the most careless. They stood by the lake and played a farewell song as a gift. Listening to the sad sound of the flute and zither, Ning Ke snatched back half of the sealwort from the big black horse's mouth. He looked at his two senior brothers who were beaming with joy and said angrily, "Is this a farewell or a funeral? Can you not be so unreliable?" The big black horse was also very angry at this time, but no one cared about it. The big white goose was swimming slowly in the mirror lake, pretending to be deep. The little white wolf was half squatting beside Tang Xiaodong's legs, listening to her and Song Song's conversation. It tilted its head slightly, as if it understood something. When the song was over, Beigong Weiyang came forward and took out a thin piece of paper from his bosom. He reluctantly handed it over and said, "Little brother, this is the Bailing Sanka score that the world thought was lost. It's extremely precious. You can't give me another unreliable one." Ninkei wondered why he wanted score. Tang Xiaotang, the saintess of the diabolism's doctrine, called him youngest uncle. Would he meet the saintess on his journey? But then he thought that if the score was really precious, it could be sold for a lot of money. He took it without hesitation. A score is not a score. Reliable, reliable. Do you know what reliable means? Relying is a term used in chess, so the word reliable refers to the chess records. The fifth brother walked proudly to the center of the crowd, bringing with him an endless sour smell. It was unknown how many days he had not taken a bath. The seventh sister could not help but frown and nag a few words, but he did not care. The Lang Temple is not a dragon's pool or a tiger's den. It is not worth playing such a sad song. Even if it is sad, it is still a joke. However, that shabby temple is famous for the chess world. The monks in the temple are really good at chess. Eighth brother, who had always been indifferent to worldly affairs, looked at Ning Ke with unprecedented determination and said, "Eighth brother, and I have been practicing hard in the academy." Those monks were lucky enough to be invited to the Lang Temple. "Youngest brother, you must not tarnish the reputation of the academy in chess and embarrass me on this trip." As soon as he finished speaking, eighth brother came over with a thick pile of chess records in his arms. He looked at Ning Ke and earnestly said, "Youngest brother, you've seen us play dozens of games. Even if we are stupid, our state should be much higher than those monks. It's just that you're too lazy, so your basic skills are not good." These are the chess records carefully made by two senior brothers. You can practice more on the way. Ning Ke was already stunned. He thought, "Where is this?" At this moment, fifth brother snatched the chess record from eighth brother's arms and scolded him sternly. "Stupid! What is the use of these chess records for youngest brother?" Ning Ke was overjoyed. He nodded and said, "Yes, yes." However, he did not expect that fifth brother would turn around and give the thick pile of chess records to Sang Sang. Song Song's understanding of chess is far better than youngest brother's. Fifth brother looked at Sang Sang and said pleasantly, "Sang Sang, the important task of maintaining the Academy's #1 chess player in the world will be handed over to you." The Academy was in the southern suburbs of Chong, and so they did not have to worry about the city gate being closed. Therefore, in order to avoid the summer heat, Ning Ke and Sang Sang did not leave until the sun was setting and night was falling. Looking at the black horse carriage gradually disappearing into the clouds on the mountainside, second brother frowned slightly. He felt that the atmosphere today was a little strange, as if there were some hidden things that he could not see clearly. Eldest brother watched the black horse carriage leave. After a moment of silence, he turned and left. The twilight shone on his old cotton-padded jacket, and some dust could be seen faintly. It seemed that his cotton sleeves were trembling slightly. Second brother looked back at eldest brother's back on the mountain road. He was slightly moved and chased after him. Eldest brother walked very slowly, but for some reason, it was difficult for second brother to catch up. When eldest brother walked to the hut, the sun was about to set. The night shrouded the valley, and stars appeared one after another in the dark sky. The headmaster of the academy stood outside the hut, half bent and squinting at a cylindrical iron object. He did not know what was in the iron cylinder. Eldest brother walked behind the headmaster of the academy and asked, "Teacher, what are you looking at?" "I'm looking at the stars." "Well, I should say stargazing. It's more elegant." The headmaster of the academy motioned him to come over and said, "This is made by sixth brother and 13th brother as a gift to me. They named it Stargazing Mirror. I tried it before, and the stars are still the same, but it can magnify the scenery in the distance." I think it's better to use a telescope. Eldest brother put his eyes in front of the iron cylinder and found that, as the teacher said, the stars in the iron cylinder did not become bigger. But if he looked at the mountains in the distance under the starlight, they would be clearly magnified. It's really interesting. Youngest brother really knows a lot of things, he said with a smile, but his smile was a little worried. The headmaster of the academy looked up at the stars in the night sky and said, "There may be people who are born with knowledge in the world, but there are no omniscient people. No matter how much your youngest brother knows, there are always many things he doesn't understand. It's the same for me." It's said that the 7 volumes of arcane tomes were formed by Haotian's will. When I was still a green-robed scholar like you, I could understand the other 6 volumes. Now I'm old, but I still can't understand the words left by the monk on the Ming hand scroll. Eldest brother said sincerely, "I can't understand it either." Nonsense. If I can't understand it, how can you understand it? The headmaster of the academy looked at him and said with a smile, "But since you can't understand it, don't worry about it day and night." Eldest brother said, "I have to worry about it." The headmaster of the academy looked at him and said sternly, "If this is a story, no one knows how it will develop. You don't know, I don't know, and the world doesn't know. Then why do you think that the story will end like that?" Everyone in the back of the mountain of the academy knew that no matter how cute Shin Pippi pretended to be, and no matter how Ning K interjected, the headmaster's favorite disciple was always eldest brother. The headmaster rarely criticized eldest brother, and he had never reprimanded him so severely. After a long silence, eldest brother said, "If there is no worry about tomorrow, there will be worry about today." The headmaster of the academy said, "One should worry about today, not tomorrow." Eldest brother said, "If the headmaster is not worried about the future of the world, why did he let youngest brother go to the Lang Temple?" The headmaster of the academy looked at the forest shrouded in silver light and listened to the faint sound of the waterfall in the distance. He said, "The night your youngest brother killed Xiaoho, I found out that Song Song's illness was more serious than I thought. If I really used the West Hill divine skills to cure it, I'm afraid that there would be problems in the end. I let him take her to the Lang Temple to see if the Buddhism sect could cure her illness." Eldest brother said sadly, "What if the illness can't be cured?" The headmaster of the academy turned to look at him and said, "If the illness can't be cured, your youngest brother will be very sad. So even if there's only a glimmer of hope, we have to work 100 times harder. Moreover, she shouldn't have gotten sick." "What about Haotian Taoism?" Eldest brother said, "Sang Sang is the successor of the divine priest of light of the West Hill Divine Palace. If Haotian Taoism knew that she was seriously ill, they would definitely be worried. They should have their own ways to cure her." The headmaster of the academy looked at his favorite disciple and suddenly laughed mockingly. He said, "Cure and save. If Haotian Taoism knew how to cure and save people, why would I be so distressed now? Sometimes I think that when we cure and save people, we may only cure and save our own illness." Eldest brother was thoughtful. The headmaster of the academy said seriously, "You love everyone in the world, so you can't only love one person. But your youngest brother is different. He doesn't love anyone in the world, but only one person. So after killing Xiaoho, he will be happy for the rest of his life. No one knows how far he can go in the future, but you have to bear the pain of struggling to make a choice. If you can't see through this pain, then your gains will be limited." There was silence. After a long time, a clean and gentle smile appeared on eldest brother's face again. He said, "Teacher, I'm willing to keep worrying like this, because if I don't worry, I won't be me." The headmaster of the academy looked at him and said with admiration, "I was wrong. Your love for the world is not related to any education or stereotypes. It is purely from your heart. How can this limit your future? As for me, I'm still the wild grass swaying on the wall. I always want to move with the wind, but now I don't know where the wind comes from. I don't know what your youngest brother will encounter, but I believe that if he doesn't walk, then he will encounter nothing. As long as he walks, then he will meet the future. When he meets it, it will be the day when we meet the real future. Then we can think about what to do." The headmaster of the academy said with emotion, "It's a pity that the guy who wanted to quarrel with me for 3 days and 3 nights for a bowl of braised pork is already dead. Otherwise, I would like to ask him what he would do. It was unknown when second brother came to the hut. He had been standing quietly by the side, listening to the conversation between the headmaster and eldest brother. Until now, he finally couldn't help saying, "Teacher, although I don't understand what you and eldest brother are talking about, I think I can guess what youngest uncle will do." The headmaster of the academy's expression changed slightly. He stroked his beard and asked, "What will your youngest uncle do?" Second brother said matter-of-factly, "Fight." The headmaster of the academy found that these disciples were becoming more and more like him. They said everything matter-of-factly, but where was the reason? He asked in confusion, "Fight who?" Second brother was also confused. After a while, he said seriously, "No matter who. I'm also going out. Greetings to everyone." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 505. The headmaster was furious and scolded. "How did I teach such an unreasonable guy like you?" Second brother was stunned. He thought that he had always been the headmaster's disciple, and everyone knew that he was the most reasonable person. Why did the headmaster say that he was unreasonable? Although Wangwo was not happy, he reflected on himself first. He bowed deeply and asked, "Master, last time when we talked about revenge in front of the cliff cave, you asked me to tell eldest brother that he must be resolute and decisive. Did I misunderstand?" The headmaster said angrily, "Your eldest brother is gentle and benevolent, so he needs you as a mirror to learn how to be more direct. But you are too direct, so I have always taught you to be more cautious. But now, you don't even understand what's going on. You want to fight and kill. You only have the bravery of youngest uncle, but you don't have the courage of youngest uncle. All right, he indeed doesn't have anything else worth praising, but you and your youngest uncle, other than being braver than me, what else can you do?" Second brother was very particular about filial piety. Facing the headmaster's stern scolding, he should not defend himself. Even if he wanted to respect the reason, he should wait until the headmaster's anger subsided. But when he heard the headmaster mention his most respected youngest uncle, he did not know how to defend himself. "Headmaster, I remember what youngest uncle said to me and senior brother when we were young. If we only have courage left, then courage is all we have." The headmaster was stunned and suddenly laughed. He waved his sleeves and said, "That's reasonable. In fact, I also said this to your youngest brother. If the night really comes, we could just fight back. Why do we need to think so much?" The eldest brother thought of the words youngest uncle left behind when he left the back of the mountain on the black donkey. He did not smile like his teacher and younger brother, but became more and more worried. He said, "Since we are going to resist, why don't we make some preparations before the night comes?" The headmaster stopped smiling and said, "Because we don't know where the wind comes from and where the night comes from. Then everything we do in advance may be wrong. Of course, I hope all our guesses are wrong and the night doesn't come." Eldest brother looked up at the sky and sighed. If the night comes, the light should be the most important. Why does Hao Ian have no reaction? I really don't understand what the heavens are thinking. The headmaster looked up at the dark sky and said, "Look, it's what I said before. There is no omniscient person in the world. I don't know what the sky is thinking. It has been proving this for countless years, so at least we know that it is unknowable. Billions of people in the world had long forgotten the origin of the Yulan Hungary Ghost Festival. The underworld still existed in their legends and childhood stories, but it had long become a real legend or story. No one believed that the underworld really existed, and no one believed in the nonsense of the underworld invasion. In the eyes of the people, the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival was an important festival to worship ancestors and feed ghosts. The orchid pots placed along the streets, the young girls dressed in traditional clothes, all kinds of tempting food, and the custom of lanterns made the festival not tainted with the slightest bit of gloomy and ghostly aura. Instead, it was full of beautiful and charming images. The Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival at the Lang Temple was naturally a grand event in the cultivation world. The Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival itself was also a grand event in the world. Other than cultivators, there were also countless tourists, pilgrims, and official delegations from various countries. They set off from different cities and headed towards the Lang Temple. The Tang Empire also sent a delegation according to the old custom. The level of the delegation was very high. To everyone's surprise, the envoy who represented His Majesty to tour the world was the Jinshi General Xian Zhilong. The Jinshi General was one of the 4 royal generals of the Tang Empire. After Xiaoho's death, his status became even more important. General Xian Zhilong himself was also a legendary figure. His martial arts cultivation state was extremely ordinary, but he had made many military achievements with his exquisite battlefield command. He had been continuously promoted until today. In the military of the Tang Empire, which revered military force, 3 of the 4 generals were experts at the peak of martial arts. Xian Zhilong's individual force was so weak, but he could stand shoulder to shoulder with the other 3. Just from this point, it could be imagined that he had an amazing ability in intelligence or other aspects. Such a figure was definitely qualified to represent the Tang Empire to tour the world. However, the envoy was usually a civil official. Even if His Majesty wanted to show enough respect to the Buddhism sect, it would be enough to send a noble civil official with a title. Why would he send a general? Therefore, this appointment still caused a great controversy in Chang, and it aroused great doubts in the South Jin Kingdom. Who knew if the general would look at the scenery or the city defense along the way? Who knew if the warlike Tang Empire wanted to start a new war? In the end, people confirmed from some gossip that the reason why His Majesty sent Xian Zhilong was mainly because of the following reasons. After Xiaoho's death, the position of Marshal of the Northeast Border Military, which he had once held, was still vacant. The Yueluan Kingdom in the west of the Tang Empire was no longer a threat, so Xian Zhilong wanted to be transferred to Tuyang City. Everyone knew that Her Highness in the Princess's Mansion had been trying to win over the great general of the West in recent years. This news directly caused the Empress to be furious. In order to appease his wife's anger, His Majesty had to temporarily put aside the transfer order. In order to appease his daughter and the important general of the country, he simply sent General Xian to the Lang Temple to relax. His Majesty's actions were close to fooling around. He was completely treating the affairs of the country as a family matter, which made people not know whether to laugh or cry. However, it also made many men who were troubled by family matters feel a lot of sympathy, and it also made those young girls who yearned for love feel even more admiration. Accompanying the envoy to the Lang Temple was the dance troupe of the House of Red Sleeves. 30 years ago, after the former emperor of the Tang Empire forcibly summoned the House of Red Sleeves from the South Jin Kingdom to Chang, the daughters of the House of Red Sleeves only went to the Lang Temple to participate in the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival once. Since then, they had never left Chang, and after more than 20 years, the House of Red Sleeves went out again and attracted a lot of attention. All eyes were on the official envoy of the Tang Empire. No one noticed that about a dozen miles behind the envoy, there was a black horse carriage traveling alone on the official road. The wall of the black horse carriage was engraved with complicated and indescribable lines that looked like heavy brocade. Looking at the cold reflection, it seemed to be made of iron and should be extremely heavy. However, the strange thing was that the black horse that was pulling the carriage was leisurely. The carriage traveled on the official road silently, as if it was as light as a feather. The great general of the Tang Empire, the East and the West. Why are all the Tang Empire's generals in the West? I wonder when there will be a Zheng Guanxi. Come to think of it, you don't know who Zheng Guanxi is. In the carriage, Ning Ke leaned on the soft couch and said with a satisfied expression, "This black horse carriage was a magnificent legacy left to him by his master, Yin Sei." It looked ordinary and cold, even a little stiff, but the carriage was very spacious and the equipment was extremely luxurious and comfortable. The carriage was made of stainless steel and was extremely heavy. In the beginning, when he did not have the ability to activate the talisman lines engraved on the carriage, the big black horse was in great pain. When the wheels ran over the carriage, the earth cracked. The wheels were also made of steel, but they did not have any effect on the shock absorption. It was extremely uncomfortable for him, so he rarely sat in this carriage. Now, as he cultivated, his great spirit became stronger and his state gradually improved. Especially after the guidance of Seventh Sister, he finally understood that the lines on the carriage wall were not pure talismans, but a kind of compound talisman array. After mastering the talisman array on the carriage wall, the faint aura of heaven and earth lingered around the black horse carriage and produced some kind of buoyancy. The heavy black horse carriage became a feather floating in the water. No matter how hard the wheels were, the people sitting in the carriage would not feel the bumps. The painful journey suddenly became a pleasure. However, although the talisman array on the carriage wall was permanent and could summon the aura of heaven and earth in nature, it also needed the aura of heaven and earth to maintain the talisman array. If Ninkei did not want to die of exhaustion of his psyche power, he had to put a gem in the array eye of the carriage every once in a while. This kind of gem, which contained a relatively high concentration of the chi of heaven and earth, was extremely precious. It was hard to find even in the jewelry shops in Chang'an. Now, the black horse carriage could travel so easily on the long journey because he had gone to the Imperial Center Administration and the Southern Gate Temple to cheat and rob a box of gems. The black horse carriage was very luxurious, and the amount of gems it consumed made it even more luxurious. If he was not Mr. 13 of the Academy, and if he did not have the resources provided by the entire Tang Empire, it would be impossible for him to do so. Ninkei understood this. When he represented the Academy to enter the human realm, his senior brother had also told him this. Therefore, although he did not want to care about these things in the imperial court, he had to care. Xian Zhilong is a very interesting person, he said. Sang Sang closed her eyes and softly hummed. Her body had basically recovered. The reason why she closed her eyes and hummed so softly was that she felt so comfortable that she did not want to open her eyes, let alone speak. Ninkei and Sixth Brother had opened a skylight on the roof of the horse carriage. The blazing summer sun penetrated through the skylight and sprinkled on her body, warming her up all the way. The black horse carriage was made of stainless steel. No matter the color or the material, it was the best to absorb heat. However, perhaps because of the cold aura in Song Song's body, the horse carriage still seemed so cool after being exposed to the scorching sun for a long time. It did not feel stuffy at all. Ninkei did not feel hot at all. Song Song's cold little feet were always in his arms. It was very comfortable, as if he was holding two little jade fish that had been frozen for a few days. He moved Song Song's little feet a little and reached out to pick up a delicate small porcelain pot on the low table beside him. He took a sip of the delightfully fragrant tea and turned to look out of the window. He saw the farmland on both sides of the official road outside the window. Some farmers were painting their homes, some willows were swaying in the wind, and some naked children were playing in the paddy fields. These scenes always made people feel happy and happy. Ninkei looked at those naked, dark-skinned, naughty children and felt that he had seen them somewhere before. Then he realized that as long as he walked in the territory of the Tang Empire, it would be easy to see similar scenes, because happiness was always similar. He looked at Song Song's dark little face and smiled, thinking that this long journey was actually not bad, even if there was no end. At this moment, the big black horse seemed to feel his thoughts and happily neighed. Homology in progress. I'm also on my journey today. I know it's not fun to read one chapter a day, but if I can keep updating and try not to open the skylight, I'm really working hard. I strongly recommend a novel to everyone to fill our lonely days. The novel is called Grandmaster of Dreams. I don't know the author. This is not an advertisement. I'm just a reader who likes reading this book. The word homology comes from this book. This novel has no 3 views, and now it seems to have no bottom line. I like it. It's very good. I seriously recommend it to everyone. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 506. The black horse carriage tailed the convoy of the diplomatic corps. When they were about to reach a county, there were more buildings on both sides of the official road. Ninkei still liked the scenery of the countryside, so he let the big black horse get off the official road and onto the slightly narrow, but still smooth county road. Anyway, he was confident that he would not lose the diplomatic corps in front of him. The countryside scenery on both sides of the county road was even more beautiful, with some primitive and simple flavor. After traveling for a long time, they looked at the village in front of them, and the black horse carriage stopped under a big tree outside the village. The big tree was unknown, but the area of the canopy was huge with lush green leaves. It was like a big umbrella, blocking the blazing sun and casting shadow. Ninkei untied the big black horse and let it play on its own. He walked under the big green tree and touched the thick bark with a happy smile on his face. His fellow disciples of the academy did not like to leave the mountain because they cared more about their own spiritual realm. Pure spiritual happiness was enough to make them feel fulfilled, but he was different. He had lived in Min Mountain since he was a child, and the forest was like home to him. Moreover, he had been used to wandering since he was a child, so he did not like to stay in one place for a long time. He had stood in the forest countless times and looked at the distant villages with smoke coming out of the chimneys, and carried Sang Sang away silently because of fear. It was probably because of this that he was extremely fascinated by the scenery of the villages. That year before returning to Chang, he chose to hold Sang Sang's hand and walk through the fields and villages because of this mentality. At this time, he chose a remote county road and stopped outside the village because of this mentality. Sang Sang got off the horse carriage and looked at him shyly. She said, "I fell asleep earlier." Ninkei said, "It's so comfortable. I want to have a good sleep too." Obviously, Sang Sang had not adapted to the change of her role. She was used to thinking that she was still a little handmaiden. It was really inappropriate for her to just fall asleep like that. In order to make up for this mistake, she tried to remember the last sentence she heard before falling asleep and asked, "How? Is it interesting?" Ninkei was stunned for a moment before he realized that she was answering his question from 2 hours ago. He could not help but want to laugh. Looking at her serious expression, he did not want to discourage her, so he answered, "Before leaving Chang, and Chin 7 came to talk to me. He said that General Xian had been in the Fish Dragon Gang for a period of time in his early years and had a good relationship with Chao Xiaoshu. The early years mentioned here were even before Chi 4 and the others. But I don't know why Chao Xiaoshu still lived in Spring Breeze Pavilion after General Xian became a general. You mean there is something wrong with this person?" Sang Sang asked. Only Ning Kei could understand Sang Sang's words. When she said there was something wrong with a person, she did not mean that this person should be suspected or had something to be vigilant about, but that this person was not good. Ning Kei shook his head and said, "Even if there is something wrong with him, it is the arrangement of His Majesty. Even if he is really determined to get the Northeast Border Military, as the rumors in Chang and City say, it only shows that he has the pride, confidence, and ambition that a soldier should have. The Emperor is not in a hurry, and the eunuch is not in a hurry, let alone us." Sang Sang said, "I heard that Her Majesty is very unhappy." Ning Kei said, "Don't forget that His Majesty is also my teacher's student, which means that he is my senior brother. He is a really wise person. How could such a person really treat national affairs as a family affair? He is just taking advantage of Her Majesty's anger to warn some people." Sang Sang asked curiously, "Who?" In fact, she was not curious about these things. So she opened her eyes wide and pretended to be curious, which was very deliberate, very childish, and very cute. So Ning Kei kissed her on her little face. Sang Sang was a little shy, but she did not avoid it. She did not avoid it, not because she was flustered and helpless, but because she thought it was natural for her to be kissed by Ning Quebec. So kiss him if you want. Looking at the little girl's bright eyes, Ning Kei was a little flustered. He coughed twice and continued, "Of course it is to suppress General Xian. No, to be more precise, His Majesty is warning his daughter not to get too deep into the army." "Why? Is His Majesty going to pass the throne to Her Majesty's son?" Sang Sang asked curiously. This time she was really curious, because he was one of her few friends in Chang and City, and also because she knew that this matter had something to do with Ning Quebec. Ning Kei said, "I don't know. Anyway, this matter has nothing to do with us." Even if he said it had nothing to do with them, it still had something to do with them. Otherwise, why would he think about these problems? Just like the girls from the House of Red Sleeves in the diplomatic corps dozens of miles away, it was also a problem that he had to consider. Mistress Jian did not ask him to take care of those girls along the way. But with his relationship with the House of Red Sleeves, if something really happened, he could not stand by and do nothing. In addition to their relationship, more importantly, the Academy had the responsibility to take care of the House of Red Sleeves. The girl named Xiao Xiao 30 years ago was the fiancée of youngest uncle and almost became their youngest aunt. She was Mistress Jian's biological sister. More than 20 years ago, the last time the House of Red Sleeves performed abroad was when they were invited to the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival in the Lang Temple. It was also at that festival that their youngest aunt died. Now, after more than 20 years, the House of Red Sleeves would appear in the Lang Temple again. How could Ning Ke not be vigilant? At this moment, Ning Ke suddenly felt that someone was approaching. He could not help but raise his eyebrows and look toward the direction of the big tree. He saw a black shadow sweeping over like lightning. With his eyesight, of course, he could clearly see that the black shadow was the big black horse. What made him vigilant was what had happened to make the big black horse so flustered. After all, except for the natural disaster more than 10 years ago, the public security of the Tang Empire had always been good. Ning Ke was not worried about his own safety. Even if there were rare bandits, he did not mind killing them and making a name for the Academy. It did not matter even if they were cultivators. First, he defeated Guan Hai, then killed Dao Shi, blinded Lu Yiqing, and finally defeated Xiaohou. Someone's strength had been proven countless times. Although Wang Jinglu was not convinced, there was a consensus in the cultivation world that Ning Ke, Mr. 13 of the Academy, was the real first person below the knowing destiny state. Moreover, with Sang Sang, the successor of the great divine priest of light, by his side, Ning Ke could even fight with a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state. Of course, those grand cultivators who had entered the knowing destiny state must be very clear about his and Song Song's identity and background. Who would be so free to provoke the Academy and the West Hill Divine Palace at the same time? The big black horse ran back to Ning Ke and Sang Sang, leaving a trail of smoke and dust. It kept panting and looked extremely panicked. Ning Ke looked solemnly at the smoke and dust. As the smoke and dust gradually dissipated, a bare-chested man holding a pitchfork rushed over, yelling and yelling. "Stop running, stupid horse. I'll beat you to death." Things were soon explained. It turned out that the big black horse was walking around and smelling the fragrance of the village in front of him. He could not control his mind and followed the smell to the window. He poked his head into the window and secretly ate the farmer's food. Then he was discovered by the farmer's owner and caused this chase. Ning Ke glared at the big black horse and thought to himself, "You are such a useless fool. Your young master, feed you with yellow spirit fruits every day, and you still want to steal other people's food." Moreover, it was so frightened and panting that it wanted to die after being chased by a farmer with a pitchfork. The big black horse lowered his head in shame and looked extremely honest. He thought silently that it was his fault for not being able to stop himself from eating. If he did not look embarrassed, who knew how he would be punished by Ning Quebec? Ning Ke looked at the farmer and apologized with a bitter smile. The farmer supported himself with a pitchfork and held his waist. He was so tired that he was panting. He said, "This guy runs so damn fast. He's indeed a good horse. No wonder the bowl of porridge I cooked was swallowed in one gulp." Ning Ke felt even more embarrassed when he heard that the big black horse had secretly eaten a bowl of porridge. He said with a bitter smile, "He is used to eating and being lazy. He is not much better." The farmer heard this and shook his head disapprovingly. He said, "When I was in the cavalry camp, I did not see anything better than him. Even the general's mount is not as good as him." The Tang Empire implemented a 3-year recruitment system. In order to open up new territory, the army was not small. In addition, people worshipped martial arts. So many men had experience in the army. Ning Ke was not surprised when he heard this and knew that the farmer had retired from the army. He took out some money and handed it over. He said, "This is the money for the pot of porridge. The pot must be dirty, so it is counted as well." The farmer waved his hand carelessly and said, "I saw this handsome horse through the window and guessed that it had an owner. So I came to have a look. I don't need money for porridge." Ninkei said with a smile. If you don't need money for porridge, why did you come to have a look? The farmer said matter-of-factly, that's because you have a good attitude. If you're not polite, I will not only need money for porridge, but also the wages for cooking porridge. This kind of matter-of-factness was common in the academy and among the Tangs. Ninkei liked it very much. He said with a smile, if so, I will not beat around the bush. The farmer looked at the black horse carriage and Sang, who was wearing a handmaiden uniform. He guessed that they were resting here temporarily. He invited them. It is not convenient to talk here. Let's go to my house. Ninkei was good at dealing with people and liked the farmer's temperament. But he was still the indifferent lad in his bones. He wanted to decline when he heard this. Unexpectedly, the farmer insisted and said, since we're going to travel a long distance, we should always have clean water. If you care, you can even give me money when you leave. Ninkei still wanted to decline. The farmer looked at him and frowned. He said, I can tell that you have been in the military camp. How can you be so wishy-washy? Ninkei looked at the farmer's resolute eyes and suddenly thought of the city of Wei that he had not seen for a long time. He thought of the soldiers in the city of Wei and the 3 sentences he left for General Ma before he left. Then let's go, he said with a smile, but I still want a drink. The farmer laughed and said, homemade grain wine. No matter how good it is, it will be enough. Have a good weekend. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 507. Catch them. Don't let them escape. Don't let them enter the mountain. These bandits are all king rats. Kill them all. Leave no captives. A fierce battle took place in the mountainous area at the border of the South Jin Kingdom. In the dusk, one could hear the whistling of arrows, the clashing of swords, and the desperate howls before death. There were less than 500 people on both sides of the battle. However, in the south of the mainland that had been peaceful for a long time, a battle that could leave dozens of corpses was certainly considered fierce. One side of the battle was the regular cavalry of the South Jin Kingdom. They were well-trained and had the upper hand in combat. Moreover, they outnumbered the other side, so they quickly won the battle and began to chase after the bandits. The dozens of people who were being chased ran into the deep mountains in panic. From time to time, someone was shot in the back and fell into the bushes, howling in pain. Fortunately, it was late and the mountain path was dangerous. Finally, most of them managed to escape. The dark night shrouded the Sunset Mountain. Occasionally, the strange cries of crows could be heard from the depths of the dense forest. This mountain was part of the vast mountains of the West Hill Divine Kingdom, but it was deep within the territory of the South Jin Kingdom. Beside the bonfire, there were dozens of wounded people lying down. Some were shot by arrows, while others had their arms cut off by axes. The wounded people groaned in pain from time to time. Several men in black and gold armor sat in the warmest place closest to the bonfire. It was obvious that their status in the team was higher than the rest of the people. Their armors were decorated with dense golden patterns. It was obvious that they were extremely expensive and did not look like something a group of mountain bandits would have. Hearing the cries of their companions and the cries of crows in the forest, their faces grew paler and paler. They could not help but look at their silent leader, as if they wanted to get some comfort from him. The leader was a middle-aged man who also wore black armor. However, the golden patterns on his armor were even denser and faintly emitted a faint talisman aura. The middle-aged man was called Zemo. He used to be the cavalry commander of the judicial department of the West Hill Divine Palace. The men around the bonfire were like him. They used to be cavalry commanders of the Divine Hall. When Yi Hongyu killed the former great divine priest of judgment and ascended to the seat of heavenly black jade, these powerhouses who had made great contributions to the West Hill Divine Palace were cruelly destroyed of their cultivation and chased out of Peach Mountain. In the past few years, the papal cavalrymen under their command were the most powerful armed force of the judicial department of the Divine Hall. At least in the battle to hunt down the remnants of the devil's doctrine and the heretics, the bloody storm that the judicial department stirred up in the world and left a gloomy impression on the world were mostly recorded by them. In other words, the hands of these former commanders were stained with too much blood. They had no country to return to, and no one dared to take them in at the risk of angering the current divine priest of judgment. Yi Hongyu's punishment was very thorough. She stripped them of their power and cultivation. She didn't even let go of the wealth that they had plundered over the years. In the end, she only left them an old horse, 100 taels of silver, and all their retinue. They also had this black gold armor that once represented glory and majesty, but now it could not even bring back memories. It only brought shame and fear. They did not dare to return to the West Hill Divine Kingdom and had nowhere to go. Thus, they could only wander around the countries on the periphery of the West Hill. The taels of silver were soon spent. These commanders suddenly realized that they were like those lowly ants. They had to start thinking about their next meal and where to hide. These former commanders of the Divine Hall had their own skills to make a living. However, they were all extremely prideful people. How could they possibly ask them to do manual labor or something like that? The most troublesome thing was that their years in the West Hill Divine Palace had nurtured their habit of bossing people around. They were high and mighty and treated mortals like dogs. In the past, these habits and attitudes could be called majesty. Now that they had left the West Hill and become ordinary people, these had become obstacles in their lives. One day, the former commander's team had an incident with a tyrant from the Kingdom of Song. One commander could no longer suppress his anger and ordered his retinue to cut off the tyrant's head. Then, they broke into the tyrant's manor and robbed him of all the gold and silver. They stayed in a luxurious inn in the state capital and enjoyed the wine and women brought by the gold and silver. Suddenly, these former commanders who had been in a daze for several days found a way to survive without bowing and scraping. This method was simple and direct, and they could earn money very quickly. Although their cultivation had been destroyed and they were not even as strong as ordinary men, they were once the cavalry commanders of the West Hill Divine Palace. They had excellent strategies and commanding skills. The retinue that followed them were also very powerful. At least, they could not be compared to the guards in the secular society. So naturally, they began to rob and rob for a living. In a very short period of time, they successively raided several large clans in the countryside. During this process, everyone, including ZMO, remained silent and did not say anything. However, they knew very well that they, who had once sworn to protect light and justice, were falling into a bottomless black abyss. They still felt extremely humiliated and painful in their hearts. Fortunately, they now had a lot of gold and silver, so they could buy a lot of strong wine and women to numb themselves and live one day at a time. Unfortunately, this numbing accelerated the speed of their depravity. They became more and more violent during robberies. Some even started to rape and even kill. ZMO clearly realized that if this continued, there would definitely be problems. He tried his best to restrain them. However, the Divine Hall commanders who had begun to fall were like tigers released from their cages. They fell from the glorious Peach Mountain to the dirty dust. This stimulated them even more, and they could not be restrained at all. One day in midsummer, during a routine robbery at night, one of the commanders or retinue went crazy and beheaded an aristocrat who had already surrendered. The atmosphere of madness suddenly spread, and a tragic massacre took place in the manor. Accompanied by despairing cries, the aristocrat's entire family was killed. Robberies were naturally accompanied by death, and even rape was not rare. However, to kill a South Jean aristocrat's family, especially when the manor was not far from the capital of the South Jean Kingdom, they were in big trouble. This massacre did not alarm the powerhouses in the Sword Garret, but it was enough to alarm the imperial court of the South Jean Kingdom. During the investigation, the imperial court of the South Jean Kingdom was quite cautious when they found out that the murderers were wearing the armor of the cavalry commander of the Divine Hall. They sent letters to the West Hill Divine Palace, confirming that these people were sinners who had been expelled from the Peach Mountain and were no longer entitled to the protection of the Divine Hall. Thus, the imperial court of the South Jean Kingdom's caution at the beginning turned into anger. The South Jean Kingdom began to distribute arrest warrants and offered a high reward to the informants. On these arrest warrants, these murderers were given a new name, Fallen Knights. The South Jean Kingdom was powerful, second only to the Tang Empire. Now that they were being treated so seriously, these Fallen Knights, no matter how sharp their eyes were or how good their commanders were all useless. They suddenly fell into a miserable situation and fled in all directions miserably. In the process of fleeing, retinue constantly died or ran away. Even these commanders were killed, and several others were seriously injured. The troop that had left the West Hill with more than 100 people was now left with only a few dozen. Today, they were almost completely annihilated in the encirclement outside the forest. Beside the bonfire, painful howls echoed incessantly. Their expressions were so desperate and gloomy. Are we waiting for death here? A strong and burly retinue stood up and walked to the bonfire. Looking at his companions who were mostly injured by arrows because they did not have armor, he said loudly, "Why don't we leave?" Retinue were equivalent to the servants of knights. They were most particular about loyalty. Once they betrayed their master, no one would take them in. However, this person said that he wanted to leave, which proved that the current situation was indeed at its most critical moment. A cavalry commander looked at this retinue with a gloomy expression. He roared angrily, "Gwenu, I've treated you well. If it weren't for me, how could you be in this situation today? How dare you betray me? Don't forget that your retinue is also on the arrest warrant. Where can you go?" The retinue called Gwenu looked at his master and sneered. "I've worked hard for you for so many years, but now I've fallen into this situation. How can you say that you've treated me well? As for the arrest warrant, except for your masters who have portraits, who would know such insignificant people like us? We've also robbed a lot of money these days. Let's go our separate ways. Who can find us if we hide?" The commander said angrily, "Don't forget that the money is with me." Gwenu looked at him disdainfully and said, "I know you won't give the money to you. Knights like you won't let us off even if you die. However, don't forget that your cultivation has already been crippled by the divine priest of judgment. You're now a bunch of useless people. Do you still think it's the same as before?" He looked at the retinue sitting around the bonfire and shouted, "What are you still hesitating for? It's all because of our efforts that we've been able to rob so much money these days. These fellows have long been crippled. They can't even pick up a knife, so how can they be a match for us?" The bonfire was not very strong, and the forest further away was dark. It was impossible to see the expressions on the faces of the retinue, but it was possible to faintly see that they had all raised their heads. The commanders had once been high and mighty. They could bestow favors on their retinue, and could also treat them like livestock. Tonight, their own retinue had actually rebelled. It was truly an unbearable humiliation. However, they had to admit that the current situation was extremely dangerous. If they handled things carelessly, they really could end up as corpses in the forest. At this moment, Gwenu's voice came to an abrupt halt. An extremely thin metal wire had unknowingly appeared on his neck, and then suddenly tightened. The metal wire sank deep into his skin, and blood instantly gushed out. Gwenu's eyes widened in horror. His hands desperately dug at his neck, trying to dig out the metal wire. However, his actions were futile. The more he struggled, the deeper the metal wire sank. Layer by layer, it cut through his windpipe, then his esophagus, and all his blood vessels. Please vote for me. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 508. Sizzle. Blood kept spurting out from Gwenu's neck and fell into the bonfire, giving off a very faint burnt smell. He collapsed on the ground and kicked his legs desperately. His boots kicked up clumps of mud, but he still could not stop the arrival of death, and could not stop his crotch from being wet with urine. Some retinues stood up in shock, but no one dared to move because of years of prestige. Zemo's face appeared in the dark. He used his hand, which was no longer strong but still stable, to take back the metal wire around Gwenu's neck and wipe off the remaining blood and flesh. He looked at the retinues with complicated expressions around the bonfire and said expressionlessly, "Even a disabled person is not someone you can disrespect. Never underestimate the means we have learned in the judicial department. So if you don't want to die, you'd better stay calm." The retinues slowly sat back down and lowered their heads. No one knew what they were thinking or if they were really calm. The current crisis was temporarily resolved, but the commanders in front of the bonfire still looked extremely pale and gloomy, just like their mood at this time. Their desperate future was one of the reasons. The most important thing was that they still could not accept the reality. They used to be respected commanders of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall. Even the generals of the South Gene Kingdom had to be respectful when they saw them. But now a random state army of the South Gene Kingdom dared to besiege them, and they were besieged so miserably that even their own retinues dared to betray them. "Your Excellency, what should we do?" A divine commander's voice trembled as he asked in despair. ZMO was the most experienced and powerful among these fallen cavalrymen of Divine Hall commanders. He was elected as the leader by the crowd. At this time, they could only hope that he could come up with a solution. ZMO also did not know what to do. Where could these disabled and defeated soldiers go next? In fact, if it weren't for the punishment of the Divine Hall of Judgment, they could still be honored guests of all countries with their wisdom and strategies, as well as their ability to command on the battlefield. However, the Divine Hall of Judgment had cut off this possibility in advance. Every time he thought of this, his hatred and fear for the young divine priest grew stronger. Now the only thing he could rely on was himself. Only by restoring his strength and becoming strong again could he survive in this world. However, how could he become strong again when his cultivation was destroyed? The legendary elixir was just a legend after all. ZMO laughed at himself, then said in a low voice, "Wash up and go to sleep." Hot water was nowhere to be found in the wilderness. While escaping, he could not care about enjoyment and could only sleep. Someone used soil to extinguish the bonfire, and the forest suddenly became pitch black. The thick clouds in the night sky covered all the stars, indicating that there might be a storm tomorrow. Some of them could not bear the exhaustion brought about by the escape and fell into a deep sleep. Some people could not sleep while imagining a hopeless future. Zihei looked at the dark night above his head and thought of the heavy rain tomorrow. His heart became heavier and heavier. He slowly clenched his trembling hands in extreme pain. He desperately and unwillingly thought, "If I can regain my strength and become as strong as before, then I'm willing to give my life and everything to Netherworld King." In the Silent Night Forest, there were still many people praying in despair. The sky was gloomy, but there was no rain, nor was there a rainstorm. However, there were clouds covering the sun, and the midsummer journey became much cooler. Since there was no sun, Sang Sang did not need to bask in the sun through the skylight of the horse carriage. Ning Kane naturally occupied that position. He stepped on the soft couch and stretched his upper body out of the skylight. Facing the wind blowing on the official road, he looked at the surrounding scenery and felt a sense of joy like a rich man. It had been a few days since they left Chong, and the black horse carriage had been following the diplomatic mission from afar. Although they had taken several county roads along the way, they were never worried about losing track of them due to the intelligence reports from the government, especially from the secret guards. It was the same even when they left the wilderness and entered the mountains in the south. A vast range of mountains appeared in the middle of the southern wilderness of the Tang Empire, dividing the territory into two regions. Perhaps the mountains had a certain influence on the climate. The same fertile soil in the south and north of the mountains produced very different crops. However, the black horse carriage was traveling in the mountains at this time, so Ninkei and Sang Sang did not feel any difference. Compared with the familiar Min Mountain, the mountains in the south of the Tang Empire were not so high. However, because the rock was special and easily dissolved in water, there were landslides all year round, which made the peaks strange and steep, extremely difficult to climb. Fortunately, there was a valley with dense green plants in the mountains, and the bottom of the valley was a natural passage. Otherwise, if they wanted to connect the north and the south, they might have to detour for more than 1,000 miles. Hundreds of years ago, the Tang Empire used a lot of manpower and material resources to widen the valley, and used talisman masters and tactical array masters to strengthen the two loose and dangerous cliffs of the valley. Then, they planted numerous trees with developed roots that could stabilize the rocks, and finally, the natural road in the valley became a very smooth, official road. The black horse carriage traveled on the smooth, official road and in the quiet valley. Ninkei leaned out of the skylight and squinted to enjoy the scenery on both sides of the official road. Looking at the green and calm cliffs, he imagined the great transformation of nature by the Tang people hundreds of years ago. He thought of the talisman masters and tactical array masters with white hair because of the exhaustion of psyche power and the soldiers and craftsmen who fell off the cliffs. He could not help but feel a little heroic. This heroic feeling had nothing to do with the skylight of the Black Horse carriage, and had nothing to do with the rich man. The Tang Empire had gone through so much difficulty to open up this mountain range and connect the central and southern territories. It was easy to imagine the strategic importance of this beautiful and verdant valley. Ninkei could faintly see that there were extremely dangerous and steep mountain paths in the distance of the valley. Beside those mountain paths, there were extremely simple and crude guard stations a few miles away. Looking at the scale of the buildings and the guard stations, there were probably no more than 10 Tang soldiers stationed there. Thinking of the Tang soldiers stationed in the boring guard stations all year round, even someone as indifferent as Ninkei could not help but feel a sense of admiration. Even the most verdant valley would be a little boring after looking at it for too long. Even the most heroic emotions would calm down after a long time, and even the most vicissitudes of history would become indifferent after experiencing it for a long time. Ninkei sat back in the horse carriage and drank the herbal tea on the short table. When he calmed down, he picked up the brush and began to write. The purpose of going to the Lang Temple this time was to cure and save people. At the same time, he was also seeking Buddhism, so there should not be any danger. However, Ninkei still maintained the habits of his youth. He was always ready to face a battle of life and death. Therefore, he was not writing a calligraphy section, but a talisman. The talismans he had written in the past 2 years had all been used on Xiaoho in the battle at the Winter Lake. He had to prepare more now. After some time, Ninkei raised his head and put down his brush to rest. He rubbed his eyes and looked out of the window. He found that he was still in the valley and could not help but be a little surprised at how long the valley was. When he was writing the talisman, Sang Sang was tidying up the luggage beside him. She touched something and looked at it for a long time before she guessed what it was. She frowned and asked, "How did it become like this?" She held a small iron kettle in her hand. Looking at the deep lines on the outside of the kettle, it should be the same kind of thing as the small iron kettle that had exploded in the lotus field of the Snow Lake. However, it was much smaller and the shape was also very different. The most obvious difference was that there was an extra bayonet at the bottom of the small iron kettle. This is a whimsical idea of Fourth Brother. Who would have thought that Sixth Brother would really do it? Before we left the academy, we tried it once. That day, you and Xiaodang went to the back of the mountain to pick wisteria and cook meat, so you didn't see it. Ninkei took the small iron kettle that looked a little delicate. It seemed more accurate to call it a small iron tube now. Took out a talisman arrow from the iron box and inserted it into the bayonet at the bottom of the small iron tube. With a click, the arrow and the bayonet of the small iron tube were locked tightly. It was so tight that there was not a gap, and it seemed to be unusually stable. Sang Sang reached out to try it and said, "It won't fall." Since he was a little older, Ninkei's weapons had been handled by her personally. She was very experienced in sharpening knives and repairing bowstrings. If she said it wouldn't fall, then it wouldn't. Ninkei took out the iron bow and assembled it. He put the talisman arrow in the small iron tube on the bowstring and calmly looked out of the window at the verdant canyon cliff trees that kept moving backward. His breathing gradually calmed down. The primordial 13 arrows were originally extremely terrifying weapons. Now that the people at the back of the mountain of the academy had forcibly added such a thing, it could be imagined that once it was shot, it would definitely cause a great commotion. This was not the back of the mountain of the academy, so Ninkei could not really shoot it out. Otherwise, if he shot down the cliff that the previous generation of talisman masters and tactical array masters had painstakingly reinforced, even the headmaster of the academy would not spare him, let alone his majesty. After a moment, he put down the iron bow in his hand and said a few words. Sang Sang shook her head and took the iron arrow from his hand. She said, "Although it's not a big problem, the tail of the arrow has to be adjusted. The original talisman arrow could ignore wind resistance and even use the wind as a help. But now the talisman arrow has to be heavier. The most troublesome thing is that the area of the arrowhead facing the wind is too large. If you still want to ensure the accuracy, the shooting distance will definitely be greatly shortened." Ninkei stuffed the bow and arrow into her arms and reached out to take a water radish. He started to chew it and said in a very irresponsible manner, "It's up to you." The black horse carriage finally drove out of the verdant canyon and came to the southernmost plain of the Tang Empire. The scenery on both sides of the state highway suddenly opened up, but the wind became a little gentler because there was more water. Ninkei's attention was still on the vast mountains behind him. The moment he came out of the canyon, he suddenly thought that there were countless tactical arrays and talismans set up by the predecessors in the canyon. If a strong enemy were to invade from the south in the future, he only needed a great divine talisman master like Yin Sei to dispel these tactical arrays and talismans to block the canyon. Even if more than 10,000 cavalry came to attack, it would be impossible for them to attack the heart of the Tang Empire at a high speed. Soon he rejected his own idea. There were so many tactical arrays and talismans in the canyon, and it was impossible for one person to destroy them, even if his master was reborn. Unless the Empire had already tampered with these tactical arrays when they opened up the canyon. And even if the cliff collapsed and the road was blocked, the mountains would block the Tang Empire's reinforcements from the south at the same time. In the war, only a simple road was needed. The strong enemy who had the courage and strength to attack the Tang Empire must have enough tactical array masters and talisman masters to forcibly open a road for the cavalry to drive. Then the initiative of the battlefield might fall into the hands of these enemies. Therefore, his war deduction still needed a peerless powerhouse to guard the exit of the verdant canyon. That powerhouse must be strong enough to kill the Buddha, the devil, and the Taoist priest. Moreover, he could not rest, let alone sleep, eat, or drink. He might even have to fight with the enemy's powerhouses for 3 days and 3 nights. Thinking of this, Ninkei could not help laughing. He thought that there was no such a powerful person in the world. Even if there was, how could such a powerful person be so stupid to fall into a situation of certain death? I am looking forward to the future in advance. Green Mountain, Verdant Canyon. See you in the next volume. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 509. Out of the verdant canyon, they came to the real south of the Tang Empire. The fields were crisscrossed, the flowers and trees flourished, and the rivers flowed smoothly towards the south until they finally merged into the famous Great Swamp. Because of the mountains in the north and the verdant canyon, the Tang Empire did not deploy a large number of troops on the southern plains, even though the South Jin Kingdom was powerful and the navy was even more famous. As a result, this similarly rich and populous wilderness was less magnificent than the north, but more elegant and beautiful. The same was true for the houses on both sides of the road. Most of them had white walls and black eaves, high and low, and were faintly discernible between the green trees and water wheels. It did not appear monotonous, but instead had a different kind of quiet beauty. The black horse carriage continued south. The scenery along the way became quieter and quieter. There were more and more rivers and clear ponds and stone bridges. There were fewer farmlands, but more quiet manners. They had arrived at Qinghe County. There was a big city in Qinghe County, known as the first city in the south of the Tang Empire. It was called Yangwan. Although this city was not strategically located, it was located in a very important transportation route. Therefore, although the imperial court did not station a large number of troops here, the defense of Yangwan was under the direct control of the Defender General of the state, Su Shi. Today, the governor of Yangwan was surnamed Zhong. The first surname in the city was also Zhong. They basically controlled all the industries in the city, and the Zhong family was just the most inconspicuous among the big families in Qinghe County. These big families in the south of the Tang Empire owned vast tracts of land and countless wealth. What really made these families last for a long time was the importance they attached to education. These families paid the most attention to education and inheritance. With more than 1,000 years of history, no one knew how many famous people had come out. Not to mention the officials of the Tang Empire, the successive empresses from many years ago, and even several great divine priests of West Hill. Today, many of the children of Qinghe County were serving as priests in the West Hill Divine Palace, or were hired as instructors by the Revelation Institute. The officials at all levels in Qinghe County were basically the descendants of the aristocratic families. However, due to the strict laws of the Tang Empire and the secret suppression of the imperial family for hundreds of years, the families in Qinghe County were relatively low-key. Moreover, they held office in their own hometown and always wanted to fight for face with Chang and city. Therefore, the entire Qinghe County could be said to be politically clean and well-governed. It was very prosperous and lively. Coupled with the unique atmosphere of literati and a slightly comfortable religious atmosphere that could be accepted by the Tangs, it had always been one of the top 3 places to visit in the hearts of the Tangs. There were many shops and tourists in Yangwan City. There were a total of 132 lakes, big and small, so it was also known as the City of 100 Lakes. The most famous one was the Thin Lake in the south of the city. Although the lake was not big, it was close to the government office. More importantly, there were the best brothels and inns in the south by the lake, and the most gorgeous pleasure boats on the lake. The diplomatic corps headed for the Lang Temple rested in Yangwan City for a few days and stayed in a relatively quiet mansion on the east side of the Thin Lake. The mansion belonged to the Song family, one of the 7 families in Qinghe County. When they heard that the diplomatic corps was coming a month ago, the Song family did not hesitate to let them stay. It could be said that they had given the diplomatic corps enough face. There was a post office of the Tang Empire about 4 blocks away from the Thin Lake. A black horse carriage was parked outside the post office. Ninkei looked at the scenery of the city through the window. He looked at the scholars on the street who bowed to each other and could not help but smile. He thought of his former classmate in the academy, Zhong Dajuan of Yangwan. The Zhong Dajuan that the Zhong family of Yangwan had vigorously cultivated, the Zhong Dajuan that used to be extremely hostile to him, the Zhong Dajuan that he had slapped countless times, the Zhong Dajuan that he had impersonated, the Zhong Dajuan that he had locked up for a long time, the Zhong Dajuan that he had not thought of for a long time. It's all in the past. Ninkei recalled the days in the academy and could not help but feel that it was a lifetime ago. Now that he and Zhong Dajuan were people of 2 different worlds, he naturally had the right to feel this way. Because of the Zhong Dajuan that he hated, he naturally did not have a good impression of the Zhong family that controlled Yangwan. Incidentally, he also did not have a good impression of Yangwan City. Although he could not find any fault with the city from the horse carriage, he somewhat stubbornly believed that compared to Chang, this city was lacking something. As for what exactly it was lacking, he was too lazy to think about it. At this moment, Sang Sang walked out of the horse carriage. Ning Kei asked, "Have you sent the money?" Sang Sang nodded. Ning Kei said, "Are you sure that you used the imperial court documents?" Sang Sang said, "Of course I won't forget to save 5 taels of silver." Ning Kei said with satisfaction, "That's good." Ever since they left the city of Wei, or more precisely, since the old brush pen shop opened and began to earn a lot of money, they would send some money to the city of Wei on time every month. Although the amount was not much, it was still something. According to Ning Kei, it was useless to send money to that shabby place. No matter how much money they sent, it would eventually end up in the gambling house and the wine shop. So there was no need to help those 2 guys. Ning Kei basically spent all his money on buying, renovating, and repairing the house by the Yiming Lake. He even spent the next year's gambling house bonus. However, this trip to the Lang Temple should be counted as a business trip, so he did not hesitate to deceive Professor Huang He, the headmaster of the academy's words, and swindled 3,000 taels of silver from the front yard. Then he threatened and lured Su Chongshan to get 1,000 taels of silver. His pocket was as full as yesterday. He and Sang Sang were still used to being thrifty. However, since they were rich, they naturally began to care about enjoyment. Although the carriage left by Master Yinsei was good, it was a little shocking to live in a carriage in Yangwan City. So he chose the most luxurious inn by the Thin Lake and asked for the best room. He handed the big black horse to the inn's waiter and told him not to feed it dry food like bean buns. The waiter was shocked and speechless. He thought to himself that Ning Kei was indeed a rich man. His horse was so delicate that it could not even eat bean buns. Ning Kei was not afraid that the big black horse would get a stomachache, but he was afraid that it would get angry because the food was not good enough. One had to know that this fool was already used to eating fresh fruits, sealwort, ginseng, and other nourishing things. How could he be interested in those bean buns? As for grass, he wouldn't even look at it. It was originally a foodie. This year, it was led into the ditch by the old yellow bull. It began to pay attention to food like the headmaster of the academy and followed the rule that food was the god. If it really went crazy because of food, even Ning Ke might not be able to control it. After a simple wash in the room, Ning Ke took Sang Sang to the front yard of the inn and asked for a private room on the second floor. They leaned against the railing and looked at the thin lake. As expected, they ordered the most expensive dishes. The food in the south was really unique. Greasy food like smoked duck and meat with soy sauce could also be made light. A green sprout on the side of the plate was elegant. Light food like tofu and green vegetables were dyed with thick soy sauce. Together with a few pots of fruit wine, it was really pleasing to the eyes and the mouth. When Ning Ke and Sang Sang were eating happily, they suddenly heard some noises coming from the lake downstairs. Someone was talking about something that happened today, and the tone was quite angry and dissatisfied. Ning Ke listened quietly for a while and asked the manservant to call the innkeeper. He threw an ingot of silver to the innkeeper and found out what he wanted to know. Old Grandfather Chui is celebrating his 100th birthday. It is such a big event. Even His Majesty wrote a congratulatory message and asked the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rites to bring it. The West Hill Divine Palace also sent someone, Xian Zhilong, the general of the West. He is a general of the Tang Empire. He did not rest after entering Yangguan, but rushed to the Fuchin River Chung Garden to visit Old Grandfather. How dare the House of Red Sleeves be so rude? The innkeeper said. It was obvious that he was really unhappy. Ning Ke then knew that the day after tomorrow was the 100th birthday of Old Grandfather Chui of Qinghe Prefecture. Perhaps the Chui family thought that the House of Red Sleeves seldom came out of Chong, and so they invited them to sing and dance at the birthday party. But it seemed that something went wrong. The families in Qinghe Prefecture had been around for thousands of years, even longer than the Tang Empire. They had always been respected by the world. Except for the Zhong family, the other families did not live in Yangguan, but in the manors by the Fuchin River. There were many famous gardens on both sides of the Fuchin River, which silently proved the background and power of these families. It was universally acknowledged that the Chui family in Ruyang was the leader of the families in Qinghe Prefecture. The Chui family originated from Ruyang State. 1,000 years ago, when the Tang Empire was founded, the Chui family disregarded the opposition of other families and firmly supported Chong, and they agreed to let Qinghe Prefecture be incorporated into the Tang Empire. Although it was mostly due to the terrible pressure of Emperor Taizu of the Tang Empire, the Chui family's insistence was proved to be extremely wise. The families in Qinghe Prefecture not only survived, but also won the favor of Emperor Taizu and fought for a lot of benefits. The other so-called families that dared to ignore Emperor Taizu all ended up with a tragic ending. In the subsequent history, the Chui family contributed a total of 5 empresses to the Tang Empire. In other words, His Majesty in the Palace of Chong, and must also have the blood of the Chui family. In addition, what was even more awe-inspiring was that the Chui family contributed 2 great divine priests to the West Hill Divine Palace. Today's Chui family was still powerful and unattainable. Old great-grandfather Chui, who was about to live for 100 years, had once been the prime minister. Under the deliberate suppression of the royal family and the civil and military officials, an official from the families in Qinghe Prefecture could actually become the first among the civil officials. This was the first time in nearly 300 years. Just from this alone, one could imagine how important the old great-grandfather Chui was. Many years ago, the old great-grandfather Chui retired from the position of prime minister. Later, his second son was an assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel. Now he had resigned and spent his days leisurely in the manor of Fuchin River. The one who remained in the imperial court of Chong and was the eldest grandson of the 3rd generation of the Chui family. He had also become the junior minister of the Supreme Court. Such a person naturally deserved the emperor's personal congratulation and the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rites to come in person for his 100th birthday. Even many officials in the imperial court guessed that if it was not for the implementation of the national policy, perhaps the emperor would have rewarded him more heavily. Now, the House of Red Sleeves might have angered such a super family. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 510. The legendary families of Qinghe County were extremely wealthy and powerful. They had stood for thousands of years in the long river of history. However, they were literate and did not have the face of nouveau riche or the stench of money. They were truly respectable. If Ninkei had heard about these powerful families a few years ago, he would have been extremely excited or yearning for the wealth and power of the families in Qinghe County. However, he did not even bother to raise his eyebrows when he heard about these because he really could not get excited. Although he had not entered the realm where wealth was nothing to him, the word wealth was really no different from the floating clouds between the cliffs in the back of the mountain. The back of the mountain of the academy was an unknown place. Although it was said that the two worlds were connected and he wanted to represent the academy to enter the human realm, in fact, he was getting further and further away from the secular world. No matter how great a family was, it was still great in the mortal world. How could it be qualified for people outside the mortal world to look down on it? It was just that he did not know when this person outside the mortal world would become a sublime person outside the mortal world. He did not need to care about the families in Qinghe County, but he had to care about the House of Red Sleeves. He looked at the golden thin lake outside the fence and fell into deep thought. The House of Red Sleeves had a strong background and Mistress Jian was on good terms with the Empress. However, it was just a song and dance troupe and also a brothel business. Although the Tang Empire was open and people did not feel that it was lowly, it was not very glorious either. Then why did those girls dare to fight with the families in Qinghe County? More importantly, the House of Red Sleeves had no reason to offend these powerful families in the south. According to the itinerary, even if they danced and danced at old Master Chui's birthday banquet, they would not have a problem in time. This does not make sense. Ninkei said, the House of Red Sleeves is just a song and dance troupe. Where did they get the courage? You are right, sir. The shopkeeper sighed and said, although Yangguan is not as good as Chong, and in Qinghe County is just a part of the Tang Empire, we are not an ordinary countryside. Old Master Chui's birthday banquet is not a place that anyone can go to. They dared to make excuses when I asked them to dance. The ignorance and disrespect of these girls is really unbearable. Ninkei smiled and waved his hand to signal the shopkeeper to leave. After a while, the smile on his face gradually disappeared. He looked at Thin Lake outside the fence and said expressionlessly, so they're deliberately making things difficult. The Nikhang song was a dance performed by the House of Red Sleeves during the enthronement ceremony of the new monarch of South Jin Kingdom more than 30 years ago. It was said that when the Nikhang song danced, no audience dared to blink, and no musicians dared to look at the dancers. When the dance reached its climax, it could even be seen that flowers were falling from the sky. No matter how exaggerated the rumor was, Ninkei did not believe it. He had seen many dances in the House of Red Sleeves, but he had never seen Nikhang. It was not that the girls in the House of Red Sleeves were keeping secrets from him, but that the dance required 36 dancers to dance at the same time, and the building did not have such a large space. Over the years, the House of Red Sleeves had not performed the Nikhang song in other places except for a few times in Chang'an. No one knew that the House of Red Sleeves could no longer perform the Nikhang song. The Nikhang song had high requirements for the leading goddess. Lu Shui, the only one who was able to lead the dance in the past 5 years, had married into a good family. The new girl trained by Mistress Jian was not as good as Lu Shui. She could dance 90% of the charm of the Hushuan dance, but she could not master the Nikhang song. The House of Red Sleeves was still the House of Red Sleeves, even though they could not dance the Nikhang song. They were invited to the Lank Temple this time to perform a dance called the Heavenly Maiden Scattering Flowers. It was said to be equally beautiful. However, it was still a terrible thing that their most famous dance might be lost, so it became a secret. The House of Red Sleeves had a close relationship with the Academy, and even more so with Ning Quebec. If he wanted to, he could even know each girl's menstrual cycle. For him, the House of Red Sleeves could not have any secrets. He knew that the House of Red Sleeves could not perform the Nikhang song. So he was sure that the aristocratic families in Qinghe County insisted that the House of Red Sleeves perform the Nikhang song because they knew about it. But why would the aristocratic families in Qinghe County make things so difficult for the House of Red Sleeves? Ninkei could not figure it out no matter how hard he thought about it. He hurriedly finished his meal and left the inn with Sang Sang. They returned to the post office and looked at the black signboard of the post office. He found the mark he needed and followed the mark on the street of Yangwan to an inconspicuous grocery store. In the grocery store, the shopkeeper bowed slightly and said politely, "What can I do for you, sir?" Ninkei said directly, "This is the secret guard's place, right?" Hearing this, the shopkeeper's expression suddenly changed. He subconsciously wanted to take out a knife from his waist and stab the young man in front of him to death. But he felt that something was wrong, so he tentatively said, "Gale. Rainstorm? I don't remember. Who has the patience to remember so many of your secret codes?" Ninkei said as he took out an waist token from his belt and threw it to the shopkeeper. Before the battle with Xiaohou, he had returned the waist tokens of the secret guard and the visiting professor of the Imperial Center Administration to His Majesty in the palace. His intention was naturally simple. He just didn't want His Majesty to be in a dilemma. However, to his surprise, His Majesty returned the 2 waist tokens a few days after he killed Xiaohou. And the waist token of the secret guard directly became the head of the secret guard. Of course, this was an honorary title. The shopkeeper took the waist tag and confirmed that it was one of his people. He couldn't help but feel angry. He thought to himself, which colleague trained this newbie? Why is he acting like an idiot? Barging into the shop and asking if it's a secret guard spot? If everyone does this, then what's the point of the secret guard? Luckily, I'm careful. Wait, this waist token was a little strange. The shopkeeper looked at the obviously different patterns on the waist token and hurriedly flipped through the words on the back. His expression suddenly became strange, and he hurriedly welcomed Ning Kei into the backyard. After entering the backyard, he hurriedly knelt in front of Ning Kei, raised the waist token with both hands, and said in a trembling voice, "Your humble servant pays his respects to the head of the Imperial Center. I have been secretly displeased before, and I hope your excellency can forgive me." There had never been a rule of kneeling in the Tang officialdom, unless it was a very formal ceremony. When ministers entered the palace and met His Majesty, they just casually cupped their hands as a greeting. However, the secret guard was different after all, and the most important thing was that this secret guard was too frightened by the identity represented by the waist token. The current head of the bodyguard was Su Chongshan, a genuine official close to the emperor. Although the shopkeeper was very sure that Ning Kei was not Su Chongshan, he knew that the waist token could not be faked. It meant that Ning Kei was the superior of his superior's superior. Get up. Ning Kei looked at the shopkeeper with a slightly strange expression. He thought that since he was secretly displeased, why did he say it out? Could it be that all the secret guards of His Majesty were gentlemen who would not bully the secret room? Then how could he secretly? He shook his head and stopped thinking about these things. He said, "I came to ask about the matter between the Chui family and the House of Red Sleeves." The shopkeeper stood up with a respectful expression. He did not answer, but asked in accordance with the rules, "May I know your excellency's name?" Ning Quebec. Hearing this name, the shopkeeper suddenly had the urge to kneel again. He used a lot of strength to stand up straight and said in a trembling voice, "The 4th steward of the Chui family visited the House of Red Sleeves in the morning and left in anger." It was a very simple answer without any speculation, but explained a lot of problems. Ning Kei nodded with appreciation and continued, "I don't understand why the Chui family would make things difficult for the House of Red Sleeves. This is not in line with the image created by the families in Qinghe Prefecture, and it is also not in line with their style of doing things. If the House of Red Sleeves is just a singing and dancing troupe without any background, this kind of bullying is meaningless and will only damage their reputation. If they know the background of the House of Red Sleeves, why would they dare to do this? Not to mention the former Prime Minister and the centenarian grandfather, They're all bullsh asterisk tea in front of His Majesty. The shopkeeper said, the Chui family must know that the background of the House of Red Sleeves is the Empress. But the Qinghe Prefecture has been helping His Highness these years. In my opinion, are they trying to suppress the power of the Empress? Ning Ke was slightly stunned and said, they're indeed not ordinary aristocratic families. They actually dare to interfere in this kind of thing and even dare to choose a side in advance. Then he looked at the shopkeeper and said with a smile, you are really brave to speak frankly about the matters in the palace. The shopkeeper understood the appreciation in Ning Ke's eyes and finally felt relieved. He said respectfully, since Mr. 13 is asking, I naturally dare not hide anything. Ning Ke was slightly surprised and asked, you know me? The shopkeeper said seriously, who hasn't heard of your name nowadays? You don't have to try to please me. I am just an honorary supervisor, and I don't usually manage things. Ning Ke said, I just don't understand why the Chui family would dare to do this. Don't they know the relationship between the House of Red Sleeves and me? The shopkeeper said, previously you asked why the aristocratic families in Qinghe Prefecture dared to provoke the Empress by making things difficult for the House of Red Sleeves. I am afraid that a large part of the reason is that they guess that you are in the city. Ning Ke asked confusedly, what does it have anything to do with me? The shopkeeper looked as if he had seen a god. Sir, General Xiaohou died in your hands. Ning Ke said, so what? The shopkeeper repeated helplessly, because General Xiaohou, the Emperor's greatest helper, was killed by you. You represent the Academy and support Her Highness, so Qinghe Prefecture naturally wants to express their position. Upon hearing this, Ning Ke thought for a long time. Then he shook his head and said, the headmaster said that I am writing my own story. I don't like this kind of boring plot, so I have to solve it as soon as possible. The most important question is, when did the families in Qinghe Prefecture start to do such boring things? He asked the shopkeeper to bring a brush, ink, paper, and inkstone, and wrote a simple letter. Send this letter to old Master Chui. I really want to know whether these aristocratic families want to use the Academy's power to help Li Yu, or to do something else with Li Yu's power. If they really have other ideas, I can't guarantee what I will think of them. Have a good weekend, everyone. I'm going to fly again. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 511. Thought was a word that had a wide range of uses. It was often used to describe the feelings between men and women. When Ning Ke left the city of Wei for Chong, and he traveled with Li Yu, who was disguised as a maidservant. They had gone through hardships together at the entrance of Northern Mountain Road and told stories by the bonfire. No one could tell if he had any feelings at that time. But even if he had, it had been broken in the morning when Li Yu slowly left his shoulder and stood up. He had no feelings for Li Yu, but he still had some feelings for her. In the past few years in Chong, and the relationship between Ning Ke and Li Yu had not been broken. Since he knew that Qinghe Prefecture was helping Li Yu, he had no reason to suppress her. He just wrote a letter to the manor of the Chui family by the Fuchun River and returned to the inn with Sang Sing. They enjoyed the scenery and drank wine, as if they did not know what was happening in Yangwan City. A simple letter was just a test, and it hid some of Ning Ke's impure thoughts. He wanted to know if the families of Qinghe Prefecture made things difficult for the House of Red Sleeves simply to please Li Yu and the Academy. They wanted to show their loyalty by disrespecting the Empress, or if they had other intentions. Just as he had said to the shopkeeper, it would be fine if it was the former. However, if the families in Qinghe County really had complicated ideas, then when Ning Ke could not understand them, he would inevitably have bad ideas. He represented the Academy and entered the human realm. His ideas were very important to the Tang Empire today. In the Song family's house by the thin lake, autumn was coming and the greenery was still there. It was a beautiful season, but the atmosphere in the courtyard was a bit depressing. The girls of the House of Red Sleeves were either leaning against the railings or sitting quietly behind the tables. Their beautiful faces were filled with uneasiness and worry. They were not in the mood to enjoy the scenery at all. Not all the girls in the House of Red Sleeves were brothels. But whether it was dancing, singing, or something else. They all lived a life of greeting and seeing people off. They were all very knowledgeable. They were very clear that although they were favored by the officials in Chang, and it was because of Mistress Jian's relationship with the palace. In Qinghe Prefecture, even the officials of the imperial court were born to be 3 levels lower than them, not to mention weak girls like them. They were in big trouble when they met the aristocratic families that did not fear the empress. They all knew what the problem was, but they could not find a solution. Although the House of Red Sleeves was going to the Lang Temple under the imperial court's order, they were not an official mission after all. They could not expect the aristocratic families to fear them. As the Western General Xian Zhilong was in the Chui's garden, how could they count on him? Thinking of the frosty face of the steward of the Chui family when he left in the morning, the girls became even more frightened. A few of them looked at the little girl sitting at the head of the table and could not help showing a look of resentment. They thought that if she had not been so arrogant and fierce to the steward of the Chui family, she would not have offended the aristocratic families in Qinghe Prefecture to this extent. Although she was usually spoiled by Mistress Jian, this was not Chang'an. How could she be so arrogant? The little girl was Mistress Jian's personal handmaiden, Xiao Qiao. This time, she was the leader of the House of Red Sleeves' trip to the Lang Temple. It was obvious that Mistress Jian had begun to train a successor. Compared to 3 years ago, Xiao Qiao was slightly older, but still young. However, in this gloomy atmosphere, there was no uneasiness in the little girl's clear eyes. Instead, she looked extraordinarily cold. Looking at the girls, she frowned slightly and said, "Nothing has happened yet. What are you doing?" In the world of brothels, Mistress Jian's status was equivalent to that of an emperor, and Xiao Qiao was her designated successor. Although these girls couldn't help but silently criticize or make faces, no one dared to point out her wrongdoings. A gentle girl looked at the faces of her companions and reluctantly smiled. She stepped forward and softly advised, "Even if Lady Chui is deliberately making things difficult, your attitude this morning is a bit too tough." Xiao Qiao sneered and said, "The House of Red Sleeves only performs for His Majesty and the concubine. No matter how much the old master of the Chui family talks, he can't win against these two. For the sake of respecting the elderly, it's okay to go to the Chui garden." However, they deliberately made things difficult. The steward even dared to threaten them. Do they really think that the House of Red Sleeves is an ordinary brothel? Hearing this, the girls looked at each other. They thought that Xiao Qiao really had some of Mistress Jian's aura now. However, facing the families of Qinghe Prefecture, the House of Red Sleeves was no different from an ordinary brothel. Now that she showed such an aura, wouldn't it be more humiliating when others bullied her? Xiao Qiao knew what they were thinking, but she did not bother to explain. She took out a bag of fragrant melon seeds from her sleeve and started eating them. She knew that even if the great general of the West did not speak, someone else would. Of course, the little girl was not as calm as she looked because she was not sure whether that person was in Yangguan or not. The wind came from the thin lake and slowly blew through the courtyard. It was quiet, and only the sound of eating melon seeds could be heard. Suddenly, a servant came to report that the Chui family had sent someone again. Hearing this news, the girls who could barely sit still stood up in surprise. They thought that how could they come so fast? It seemed that the Chui family was really angry. What should they do? Xiao Qiao was slightly stunned and slowly put the melon seeds back into the bag. The 4th steward of the Chui family came to the thin lake again. It should be the 3rd time that he came here in one day and one night. There were few things that could make the 4th steward of the Chui family come to Yangguan City 3 times in a row. Those who could enjoy this kind of treatment must have an extremely powerful background. Then, there would be a lot of trouble. However, the House of Red Sleeves was destined to not encounter any trouble today, because the 4th steward of the Chui family was carried into the Song Garden on a stretcher. The girls of the House of Red Sleeves looked at the middle-aged man on the stretcher who was dying. Looking at the bloodstains that the man's clothes could not hide, they could not help but cover their mouths in shock. They could not associate this man with the calm and gentle master steward of the Chui family last night and this morning. Xiao Qiao was also a little surprised. She stood up and looked at the white-haired old man beside the stretcher. The old man bowed to Xiao Qiao and said, I am the head steward of the Chui family. I heard that a servant of the family was disrespectful to you, so I tied him up and brought him here to apologize to you. This servant pointed his finger at you, so the head of the family broke 5 of his fingers and gave him 12 strokes of the cane. Are you satisfied? At this time, Xiao Qiao naturally understood that the person was really in Yangwan City. The nervousness that she tried to hide previously disappeared in an instant. Looking at the 4th steward on the stretcher, who was covered in blood, she struggled not to clench her fists, but let them hang naturally by the side of her skirt. After getting no dissatisfaction from the House of Red Sleeves, the head steward of the Chui family apologized respectfully again and left the song garden with his people. Except for a few drops of blood on the bluestone ground, it was as if nothing had happened. It was as if the horrible shadow cast by that family in the morning last night was just an illusion. It took a long time for the girls to wake up from the shock. When they looked at Xiao Qiao again, the way they looked at her was obviously different. The calmness and indifference in Xiao Cao's childish eyes made her look unfathomable in their eyes. Moreover, she had a real imposing manner. Xiao Qiao suddenly smiled and then lowered her head to continue eating melon seeds. The girls waved their hands to drive the maidservants away. They personally served the tea and stood aside with a smile. After a long time, Xiao Qiao dusted off the crumbs in her hands and took the tea to moisten her throat. She looked at them and said, in the past, no one dared to provoke us in Chong and City. Now that we are out of Chong and City, you don't need to panic. As I said, the House of Red Sleeves is not an ordinary dance club. The 4th steward of the Chui family was beaten half to death. He was carried out of the song garden and then carried around Yangwan City on a stretcher, which caused many shocked discussions and speculations. The people in Yangwan City could naturally see that this was done deliberately by the Chui family. They were shocked and speechless. They wondered what kind of background the House of Red Sleeves in the Song Garden had to do this to the Chui family. After all, it was not an ordinary noble family, but the Chui family from Qinghe Prefecture who had the confidence to look down on the Empress's family. Then, something even more shocking happened in Yangwan City. A wood-colored carriage came from outside the city. The wheels were still stained with the red river mud of the Fuchin River. The carriage looked shabby and lonely, but everywhere it passed, the bustling Yangwan City suddenly became extremely quiet. Many government runners and stewards stood on the street to maintain order. Many shopkeepers along the street even knelt down in front of the carriage. Everyone in Yangwan City knew that there were only 2 people in Qinghe Prefecture who were qualified to sit in this carriage. One was the clan leader of the Chui family, and the other was the old master of the Chui family. The street in front of the Best Inn in Thin Lake had been closed in advance. There was no one on the street, and it was extremely quiet. The carriage slowly drove to the front of the inn. The innkeeper of the inn had already been waiting by the street. He knelt beside the carriage and respectfully kowtowed a few times. Then, he carefully helped the ordinary rich man out of the carriage. The innkeeper was the innkeeper of the inn, but he was not qualified to enter his own inn today. Following the clan leader of the Chui family into the inn, there was only an ordinary-looking, stooped old steward. The Chui family was the leader of all the families in Qinghe Prefecture. The clan leader of the Chui family was the first person in Qinghe Prefecture. In the hearts of many Tang people, the first person in Qinghe Prefecture was actually the second person in the Tang Empire. Except for His Majesty who lived in Chong and City, no other man could surpass him in status. It seemed that anyone should come out of their room to welcome such a bigwig who came to visit in person. However, Ning Ke did not do so. He did not even show any smile on his face, because he was sure that the person who could become the first person in Qinghe Prefecture was at least as smart as him. Since they were both smart people, why did they have to do so many hypocritical and meaningless things? The Chui clan's patriarch had an extremely ordinary appearance, and he was even more ordinary than the old manager that followed behind him. He wore silk clothes that couldn't be said to be vulgar, yet absolutely couldn't be said to be elegant, and he looked like an ordinary wealthy man. However, his words were not ordinary. I was wrong. The clan leader of the Chui family sighed with emotion. Back then, I wanted to make His Majesty happy in the imperial court. However, I made His Majesty unhappy, so I was driven back to Qinghe Prefecture. Now that I know that you passed by Yangguan, I probably want to prove that I can flatter you in addition to learning and governing the state. Therefore, I wanted to try to make you happy and restore some of my reputation in this field. However, I did not expect that I would still fail. It seems that I was really wrong. I don't have the talent in this field. Looking up at the sky, I have been writing from noon till now, but I have finally broken through the most difficult hurdle. Tomorrow will be much smoother. The newly bought chair is still very difficult to sit on. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 512. Shueisha used to be the Ren Huang of the Central Secretariat and worked in the palace. He was also an assistant minister in the Ministry of Rights and the Ministry of Personnel. A few years after the new emperor ascended the throne, he was impeached for something and returned to the Fujian River to work as a fisherman. From this simple introduction, this man who looked like an ordinary rich man was just a retired senior official of the imperial court. He was not worth much attention. However, Ning Ke knew very well that when Shueisha was in the palace, it was when Liu was learning to read. In other words, this man was the Princess Qiming teacher. Of course, more importantly, he was the clan leader of the Chui family, so he was a bigwig who must be taken seriously. Although he did not stand up to greet him, he deliberately pretended to be polite. That was why he did not understand what Shueisha had said. He could not understand why such an important person would want to please him and try to make him happy. Once there was a problem, he would even pay a visit. The history of the Qinghe County was longer than that of the academy. Even if he had to show respect to the academy, there was no reason for him to choose such a crude and direct method. Shueisha did not solve his doubts. In the following conversation, he calmly and naturally changed the topic, perfectly displaying the temperament and grace of a millennium family. He did not talk about anything related to the House of Red Sleeves, but only recalled the past in Chang'an. Occasionally, he would ask about Princess Liu and the little prince. Shueisha did not probe further and asked Ning Ke to greet the headmaster of the academy on his behalf. He took out a thin letter from his sleeve and put it on the table. He looked at Sang Sang warmly and then left the inn with the old steward who was hunched over. Looking at the quiet street outside the window, Ning Ke said, "He did not need to flatter me, but he did. He did it so casually and casually, without hiding his pride." Sang Sang did not understand. She thought that such a bigwig had already shown enough humility by coming to visit. How could he be proud? In the eyes of the world, the first person in Qinghe County does not need to greet me, a disciple of the academy. But he is a smart man and knows what the academy means to the Tang Empire. Since he knows this, and you're the great divine priest of West Hill, how could it be so easy for him to come? Ning Ke retracted his gaze and looked at the untouched cup of tea in his hand. He said, "There's something strange about this. I feel that Shueisha just came here to see us. The question is, what does he want to see us for? And I feel that there's a strong confidence in his calmness." Sang Sang said, "Even in the city of Wei, I have heard of the families of Qinghe County. Naturally, such bigwigs speak and act with confidence." Ning Ke shook his head and said, "There is no such thing as true poetry in the world. To be able to be passed down for thousands of years, it is all about power. The aristocratic families of Qinghe County know this better than anyone else. These aristocratic families have had great divine priests of West Hill before, but not in the past decades. I also know that there are 3 grand cultivators of knowing destiny stayed in Qinghe County, but one of them died in Chang'an. Then these aristocratic families should know that no matter how powerful Qinghe County is, even comparable to Great River, Yueluan, Song, and Wei, they have no confidence in front of the imperial court and the academy." Sang Sang suddenly said, "Well, there is something wrong with the old steward." She said there was something wrong this time, but did not mean that the old steward was a bad person. Ning Ke clearly knew what she was thinking. He could not help but be slightly startled, and then slowly raised his eyebrows. The old steward with a hunchback was too ordinary, so ordinary that he did not even notice what he looked like. But Sang Sang said that there was something wrong with him. Now that Ning Ke had already reached the peak of the see-through state, He could clearly see the threshold of the knowing destiny state. But an old steward that he could not see anything wrong with could only mean that he was a grand cultivator of the knowing destiny state. So it is someone else who wants to see me, Ninkei said in shock. Now there were only 2 grand cultivators of the knowing destiny state left in Qinghe County, and one of them actually came to see him personally. Why was Qinghe County so wary of him, the successor of the academy? If it were not for Song Song's unimaginable intuition and sensitivity, he might not even know that he had been carefully observed by a grand cultivator until a long time later. If the old steward had suddenly attacked him, Ninkei believed that he would be a dead man now. Although he knew that this would not happen, he still had a strong sense of vigilance. He did not understand the confidence of Qinghe County before, and now he could not understand the intention of Qinghe County. However, his vigilance grew deeper and deeper, even to the point of becoming a weak willow by a thin lake, binding his body and making it difficult for him to breathe. So he wrote 2 letters, one to the academy and one to the nation masterly Qing Shan, describing what he had seen and heard along the way, his view of the verdant canyon, and the story of what he had met in Qinghe County. The lonely and shabby horse carriage, under the respectful and even fanatical gaze of the people of Yangguan City, drove out of Yangguan City. Even though the old steward sat on the shaft of the carriage, his body was still hunched and his eyes drooped, as if he could not feel the gazes from both sides of the street, as if he had fallen asleep. After an unknown amount of time, the carriage drove into a quiet and secluded manor on the Fuchin River, directly driving to the deepest part of the manor. There was a small building in the garden, and the garden walls that were piled up with rocks were not very high, but there was absolutely no one who would dare to peep here, and there were no stewards or servants here. Shueisha quickly jumped out of the carriage and walked to the shaft. He respectfully helped the old steward down from the shaft and said, "Thank you, Father." It turned out that the old steward, who was still hunched, was the true leader of the Chui family. Elder Chui, who was about to turn 100, was the ancestor of the entire Qinghe County. Elder Chui waved his hand and said, "I'm just going to see someone. What's so hard about it?" Shueisha helped Elder Chui into the small building. Inside the building, there was a study room with extremely simple decorations. The windows on all 4 sides were covered with extremely thick cloth, preventing the autumn light from seeping in from the outside, making the room appear particularly dark. Vaguely, one could see 6 seats along the wall, on which sat 6 white-haired old men. Seeing Elder Chui enter, the 6 white-haired old men slowly stood up and bowed. Their movements were slow, not because they wanted to express their dissatisfaction at waiting for a long time, but because they were indeed too old. Elder Chui sat in the round chair directly above, took the towel that Shueisha had personally heated and placed it on his face. Then, he remained silent, waiting for the hot air from the towel to seep into his tired pores. The 6 old men slowly sat down and waited in silence. There was not a trace of dissatisfaction. After Elder Chui was done, he began to wash his face. He carefully and forcefully scrubbed his old face. As the warm towel rubbed, the wrinkles on his face deepened. Then, he leaned back in the chair, and his old face was completely hidden in the darkness. An old man said, "You've given the academy enough face by going personally." Elder Chui said, "We can afford to offend the Empress, but can we afford to offend the academy? Furthermore, the core disciples of the headmaster rarely step foot in the mortal world. It's rare for one to enter the human realm, so of course we have to take a good look. It's not convenient for us to go to Chong, but since he's here in Qinghe, how can we not see it with our own eyes?" An old man asked in confusion, "Why not just send the visiting card and see it directly?" Sending the visiting card doesn't necessarily mean seeing the person. Even if you see the person, you won't see his attitude. What attitude? The academy's attitude. The academy's attitude used to be impartial, but since Ninkei killed Xiaohou, their attitude will naturally be biased towards Princess Liu. They can't possibly still support the Empress. Elder Chui shook his head and said, "There are many kinds of attitudes. The ownership of the dragon chair is only one of them." An old man asked doubtfully, "The problem now is whether Ninkei's attitude can represent the academy's." Elder Chui very naturally cupped his hands and bowed towards the northern sky. He said, since the headmaster has allowed his young disciple to enter the human realm, then he has expressed his approval. What is Ning Kei's attitude that you've seen? He's a very proud and cold young man. Old Master Chui seemed to have thought of something. After saying this, he sank into a long period of silence. When his aged voice rang out once more in the dark study, it felt even more exhausted than before. Moreover, it carried a chill that made one's heart palpitate. Looking at his attitude is more like looking at him as a person. In recent years, many strange changes have happened. Out and above, I don't believe in the underworld invasion at all, but I firmly believe that there will be a big problem in the present world. To Qinghe County, to us aristocrats, perhaps these strange changes indicate that the biggest opportunity in 1,000 years is about to appear. 1,000 years ago, Qinghe County was incorporated into the Tang Empire. 1,000 years later, what kind of opportunity would Qinghe County have? There was dead silence in the study. Both the 6 old men and Chui Shi, who stood quietly by the chair, were shocked by the hidden meaning in Elder Chui's words. Elder Chui continued, "We are loyal to the imperial court, but we have to think about what we can do if the world is in chaos." Regrettably, in the past 100 years, the Empress of Qinghe County is no longer in the Palace of Chong, and the great divine priest of Qinghe County is no longer in the West Hill Divine Palace. So there is very little we can do. We can only prepare and wait in silence. So we want to see the West Hill Divine Palace's attitude towards us. I want to see Ning Kei and the Academy's attitude towards us with my own eyes. What is the Academy's attitude towards us? As I said before, Ning Kei is a very proud and a very cold-blooded person. Perhaps cold-bloodedness is just his personality, but pride is a boring temper that runs through the Academy's 1,000 years of history. It has not changed even today. The Academy has the worship of the entire Tang Empire and does not need to care about his families. So we have no bargaining chips, no right to be proud, and no room to bargain with the Academy. Elder Chui said indifferently. The 3rd Minister of Offerings entered Chong and died mysteriously. The Academy does not care, and the Imperial Court did not say anything. It is because Qinghe County is not worthy of their respect. Of course, we still have to make the necessary preparations. Elder Chui looked at an old man in the shadows and said, "Has the West Hill replied?" The old man said, "Morning has arrived. The Tao Addict, the great divine priest of judgment, has expressed her gratitude in the letter." Elder Chui nodded and said, "To be able to help Yi Hongyu secure her position as the great divine priest of judgment is also a form of good karma." The old man suddenly said, "Perhaps we can suppress this Mr. 13 and show our strength. Only then can we gain more respect from the West Hill Divine Palace. There is no point in doing more meaningless things. I don't care what your descendants in the West Hill Divine Palace have asked you in private. I just want to remind you that Ning Kei's little handmaiden will become the great divine priest of light of the West Hill Divine Palace, and his relationship with the great divine priest of judgment is more complicated than we think." Elder Chui leaned forward slightly, revealing his wrinkled face. He looked at the old man and said with an unquestionable attitude, "Most importantly, if the Academy does not change, then no power in this world has the right to change. Everyone can only wait." Everyone in the building understood that the Academy in this sentence was not referring to the Academy, but the headmaster of the Academy. So they kept silent, and then someone finally raised a question in the silence. "When I was very young, I knew that there was a mountain in the Academy. Now that I am in my 80s, that mountain still stands in the south of Chong, and how long do we have to wait?" Elder Chui cupped his hands and bowed to the north again. He said, "The headmaster has not left this world, so we can only keep waiting. Even if we cannot wait, our sons and grandsons will. No matter how great a person is, he cannot resist the laws of time. There will come a day when he returns to the Haotian divine light." There was silence in the study. Suddenly, someone asked in a trembling voice, "What if the headmaster never dies?" Elder Chui's body stiffened slightly. In the dark shadows, one could faintly see a self-deprecating smile on his old face. Then he sighed softly and said, "If that is the case, then we can only wait forever. We will wait with incomparable respect and meekness. Even if we are dogs, we have to pretend that we have been raised." The topic came to an end at this point. In this world, countless conversations, countless conspiracies, and countless paths would be forced to an abrupt end in the end. Because at the end was a mountain, and that mountain's name was the headmaster of the academy. The 6 white-haired old men left the small building and returned to their respective manors. They continued to be the masters of their families or old dogs with a 1,000-year suppressed dream. Elder Chui and Chui sure did not leave. If such a day really comes, my name will probably be engraved on the pillar of shame in history. Elder Chui said, but your name may also be recorded at the very beginning of the history books. Chui sure said, to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 5:13. At the end of the conversation, Chuisher could not help but ask his father the question that had been lingering in his mind. You said that Ning Ke was a proud and cold-blooded person. I have a different opinion. In recent years, the news from Chong, and including the princess's residence, says that this person looks clear but is actually extremely shameless. He is very good at flattery, so both the headmaster and his majesty love him. How can such a person be called proud? Elder Chui smiled and did not speak. Chuisher laughed bitterly and continued. All right, even if this person learned to be proud in the 2nd floor of the academy, where did his cold-bloodedness come from? I always thought that the information from the military ministry did not count. He could even maintain a good relationship with Yi Hongyu. In my opinion, Ning Ke is really good at politics and is very practical. Elder Chui said, it is impossible to see a person clearly just by looking at his resume and listening to his stories. That is why I insisted on seeing him with my own eyes. Even though it was just a brief glance, it was enough. Chuisher was slightly stunned. Everyone knew that Ning Ke was going to the Lang Temple, but he did not go with the diplomatic mission. Even though he stayed in the best inn in Yangwan City, he did not have any servants with him. I only saw him and that famous little handmaiden of his. I saw him holding a cup of tea, but not drinking it. I saw him talking to you with vigilance, even though he seemed to be carefree. However, I didn't see that he loved peace and quiet. Elder Chui said, this is a habit that is engraved in his bones. This can only mean that he is an extremely cautious young man. At the same time, he is also a person who does not know how to write the word trust. I even think that, other than the handmaiden, he might not even completely trust the headmaster. Chuisher was silent. Old Master Chui looked at the thick black curtains on the window and thought of the young man in the inn. He sighed and said, he doesn't even trust a teacher like the headmaster. Such a person can't just be described as cold. If there are major changes in the future, you must remember to make the West Hill promise that they must first eliminate this young man. Otherwise, we may have to pay an unimaginable price. 2 secret letters from Qinghe County arrived in Chong and City. A letter was sent to the Southern Gate Temple outside the Imperial City through the secret guard system of the Tang Empire. The recipient of the letter was Li Qingshan, the nation master of the Tang Empire. After a while, he Mingshi walked out of the Southern Gate Temple. He looked at the clear sky and thought that it might rain later. He clamped the yellow oiled paper umbrella under his armpit and boarded the carriage. Under the guidance of the steward, he Mingshi walked into the depths of the princess mansion and came to the balcony that was very famous in Chong and social circle. He greeted Liu, who was lying on the couch. Liu frowned slightly and waved her hand to signal the nanny to take away Buchi, who was writing calligraphy. Then she asked He Mingchi to sit down and asked, there seems to be some problems. He Mingchi did not sit down. This seemingly inconspicuous action meant that Liu's perception was not wrong. There was indeed something wrong, and it was not a small problem. He took out the letter from his sleeve and handed it over. Liu took the letter and tore open the cover. She was slightly startled when she saw the familiar handwriting on the paper. When she saw the contents of the letter, she could not help but frown even more. The letter was written to the nation master, Li Qingshan. In the letter, he mentioned what he had seen in Qinghe County, especially the test that the Chui family had made through the House of Red Sleeves, and the old steward who had visited him at the inn. The clans of Qinghe County were now the biggest support for Liu and her brother in the imperial court. If she wanted to help her brother ascend to the throne, She needed the approval of the Academy the most. However, she could not do so without the help of Qinghe County. Liu did not know Ning Kei's intentions in writing this letter, but she vaguely understood why the nation master had passed this letter to her. She frowned slightly and said, "Sometimes I don't really understand the actions of those old people. I can only say that these things have nothing to do with me." Mingqi nodded and said, "I will bring your words back to the Southern Gate Temple." Liu raised her head and looked at him quietly. She asked, "The nation master did not need to show this letter to me. He could have brought it directly into the palace and given it to my father or her majesty." Mingqi smiled slightly and said, "As your disciple, I am not very clear about what you mean. However, since the things in Qinghe County have nothing to do with you, I think you'll be very happy." The meaning of this sentence was very obscure and could even be said to have no meaning at all. However, as a person involved in the situation, Liu vaguely caught a certain trend in it. Her eyes slightly brightened. "I thank the nation master for his trust." The second letter from Qinghe County was sent to the Academy. Professor Huang, he looked at the words on the envelope and smiled. He did not open the envelope and let someone take it to the back of the mountain. The person who read the letter was second brother. He was beside the headmaster when he read the letter. Second brother respectfully bowed to the headmaster and said, "Youngest brother has found some problems." The headmaster's attention was on the small yellow croaker that was being fried on the iron plate. He casually asked, "Is it serious?" Second brother thought for a moment and said, "There are only 2 people in the knowing destiny state in Qinghe County. It is not serious." The headmaster said, "In that case, why are you still bothering me? Can't you see that I am busy?" Second brother was slightly startled and said, "How to deal with it?" The headmaster said, "Your youngest brother is cooking fish by the Daming Lake to understand Tao, but he still has not understood the truth of the world. Whether fish is fried or cooked, it is ultimately used for eating." Second brother understood and said, "Then we will wait for them to jump the beam." The headmaster suddenly thought of something, and his expression slightly froze. He forgot to take out the bamboo spatula from the pot, and the edge of the bamboo spatula gradually became scorched. The small yellow croaker also began to emit a burnt smell. After an unknown amount of time, he smiled and said, "If the fisherman dies, it doesn't mean that we can't catch fish. If the cook dies, it doesn't mean that we can't fry fish. The beam can't support the broken house forever. When the beam is broken, people will jump from it. Although this jump is not the same as the other jump, clowns will always be clowns." Ninkei did not know that the great ancestor of Qinghe County had such a deep and serious evaluation of him. After Sang Sang confirmed that there was something wrong with the old steward, he immediately wrote 2 letters back to Chong, and then did not think about it anymore. He ranked last in the back of the mountain of the Academy. Above him were the headmaster of the Academy and other powerful senior brothers and sisters. They would deal with the problem in Qinghe County, so he did not need to worry about it. On that day, he took Sang Sang and left Yangguan City in the Black Horse carriage. 2 days later, they stopped in front of a ferry. There were no blind thieves who came to rob them, and no stupid officials who wanted to collect taxes. What blocked the way of the horse carriage was a steaming water surface with boundless autumn reeds. The lake in front of the southern wilderness of the Tang Empire sounded very ordinary. It was called the Great Lake. Only those who had been to the Great Lake could feel the majesty of this simple name. The lake was so big that no other word in the world could be qualified to describe it except for the word great. It was just like the Yellow River in the further south. The Great Lake was vast and boundless. Even birds could not cross it in one breath. If there was no ferry, even the most powerful cultivator would not be able to cross it. This was the largest lake in the world, lying between the 2 most powerful countries in the world. It was like how Ian had created a buffer between the Tang Empire and the South Jin Kingdom. It brought peace to the people of the world, but it also brought many inconveniences. There were all kinds of ferries for goods and people to flow between the north and the south. When the water vapor dissipated, countless sails could be seen behind the autumn reeds. The scenery was magnificent and beautiful, but the Black Horse carriage could only stop by the Great Lake and wait. Because the road leading to the South Jin Kingdom had been cordoned off, several warships of the Tang Navy were waiting for the arrival of the diplomatic mission. Ninkei had many ways to ignore the martial law and leave quietly. However, regardless of whether it was for the sake of peace or if he was as cold and cautious as Elder Chui had described him to be, waiting for the diplomatic corps to travel with him would be more appropriate than taking out his waist token to reveal his identity and letting the Tang Navy clear the way for him. Fortunately, the scenery of the Great Lake was pleasant enough, and the diplomatic mission did not make him wait for too long. Just when he was about to get tired of looking at the autumn reeds and eating the raw fish in the lake, the diplomatic mission arrived. On the warship of the Tang Navy, Ninkei saw the head of the diplomatic mission for the first time. It was the Jinshi General Xian Zhilong, who was known for his weak martial arts but amazing intelligence. The main hall of the warship was empty. Ninkei and Xian Zhilong sat opposite each other. Because of their status, it was difficult to distinguish who was stronger and who was weaker. The Jinshi general was not simple. This was Ninkei's first impression of Xian Zhilong. He looked at the man who looked like a woman and had a scholarly temperament and said in his heart, "I work for Her Highness. To be more precise, if His Majesty leaves, I will be loyal to Princely Huiyuan. You don't have to look at me like this. After all, this matter will not be a secret forever." Xian Zhilong looked at him and said with a smile, "When Her Highness tried to let me replace Xiaoho's position, this secret was no longer a secret. And I believe that now that the Empress in the palace has tried her best to make His Majesty drive me into this diplomatic mission, she should have already investigated my relationship with the previous Empress." It was a very open and honest conversation, but it reminded Ning Kei of the opening remarks of the master of the Chui family in Yangguan City. So he smiled and said directly, "I don't know." Xian Zhilong said, "Before Empress Rinxiao married into the palace, I was a manservant who led her horse." Ning Kei said, "This relationship is very deep." Xian Zhilong looked into his eyes and said, "And I have a good relationship with Chao Xiaoshu." Ning Kei said, "What do you want to say?" Xian Zhilong said, "I want to make a good impression on you." Ning Kei said, "The Academy strictly forbids interfering in court affairs. Moreover, you're already one of the few bigwigs in the military. I don't think it is meaningful for you to make a good impression on me." Xian Zhilong smiled and said, "The Academy strictly forbids interfering in court affairs, but it never includes those who have entered the human realm. If you can't do anything, why did the headmaster ask you to enter the human realm?" And he suddenly leaned forward and lowered his voice. He said mysteriously, "Su Shi is old." Ninkei looked at him and shook his head. He said, "It seems that I have underestimated your ambition, and you have overestimated me. Don't forget that I am now the most unpopular person in the Tang military." Xian Zhilong smiled and said, "I welcome you very much. I have a runny nose on one side and diarrhea on the other. It is said that I have the legendary gastrointestinal flu again. Who knows? In any case, I'm sweating like rain and my whole body stinks. But it does not affect my brain. That is good. I cry silently. Am I finally beginning to act sad again?" To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 514. Ninkei did not answer because he did not know how to. However, Xian Zhilong's mention of Chao Xiaoshu and Liu made him feel less awkward when he asked the following question. "His Majesty must know that you once held the horse for Empress Rinxiao. I don't believe the rumors in the court, so I want to know why His Majesty wants you to go to the Lang Temple." Xian Zhilong looked at him and said, "All the countries gathered in Lang, of course, not just for the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival. They also want to discuss the war with the Desolate Man next year." Ninkei frowned slightly and thought of the continuous battles in the wilderness over the past 2 years. He said confusedly, "The left king's palace was plowed by the Desolate Man and then weakened by the Divine Hall Coalition Army and Ho Xiaoho. Now, they have no power to take back the grasslands from the Desolate Man. I can't think of any reason for the Tang Empire and the South Jin Kingdom to fight for the left king's palace. Wouldn't it be better to let the Desolate Man live peacefully in the wilderness?" If it did not involve the old story between the West Hill Divine Palace and the Devil's Doctrine, there was no problem with what he said. As the saying goes, it is better for the Taoist to die than for the left king's palace. No matter how miserable the left king's palace was, as long as the desolate man did not continue to move south and affect the Central Plains countries, who would be willing to face such a powerful enemy? For the West Hill Divine Palace, they don't want to see the desolate man tribe have rich grasslands and live there. That would mean the resurrection of the devil's doctrine. For the Central Plains countries, we are also afraid of the desolate man's reproduction. Without the control of the weather in the far north, the desolate man will have a large number of children. Their children will continue to have children, so they will need more and more grasslands. They will drive the herdsmen of the left king's palace to the south, and then they may even have a war with the Golden Palace. What will happen in the end? Just like 1,000 years ago, the desolate man will become strong again and fight with the Tang Empire. Xian Zhilong looked at him and said with a smile, "Since there will be a war sooner or later, why not make them weaker while they are still weak?" From an emotional point of view, Ninkei had no reason to be hostile to the desolate man because his only niece was a desolate man. He had already joined the devil, so it was even less possible for him to be wary of the devil's doctrine like the Haotian Taoism. He said, "This may be decades or even centuries later." Xian Zhilong said, "Even if it's thousands of years, it still starts from this moment." Ninkei had to admit that this sentence was very convincing, but he still did not intend to change his opinion. He had been to the wilderness before and knew that the seemingly barren land was actually quite fertile. It was enough to support many people. Earlier, Xian Zhilong had mentioned the bloody war between the Tang Empire and the desolate man 1,000 years ago. In fact, that war was not because the two sides needed to fight for living space, but because the continent needed to establish a new overlord. Therefore, in his opinion, unless something changed, the desolate man had no reason to continue moving south. As soon as the word change appeared in his mind, he suddenly thought of the dreams he had and the 2 conversations he had with the headmaster. He suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. Xian Zhilong noticed his strange behavior. The cabin was quiet, and only the faint sound of the lake water hitting the side of the ship could be heard. Ninkei suddenly asked, "Do you believe in the underworld invasion?" Xian Zhilong's expression froze slightly. Then he laughed at himself and said, "Of course I don't believe it." Ninkei looked into his eyes and said, "In recent years, Chang, and has become colder than before." Xian Zhilong said, "The winters where I fed the horses when I was young were colder." Ninkei said, "You know that's not what I mean." Xian Zhilong said, "I have been in the West all these years." Ninkei said, "Then why did the desolate man move south?" Xian Zhilong was silent. After a long time, he suddenly laughed and said, "Perhaps a legend will always be a legend. Even if it becomes true, it should be something that the legendary places like the second floor of the academy have to worry about. As soldiers of the Empire, we don't need to think too much. If the underworld invasion really comes one day, as long as His Majesty gives the order, the Tang Empire's cavalry will naturally respond." This was the standard answer of a Tang soldier. Ninkei was not surprised. However, he was one of the few people in the world who had heard the headmaster say that the night came from the north, so he had to think more. Especially when he thought about how the Lang Temple Conference involved the use of troops against the desolate man. In the next few years, the wilderness in the north would be flooded with blood. It was becoming more and more like the dream he had once had. The coldness that lingered in his body and could not be dispelled became stronger and stronger. Xian Zhilong obviously wanted to have a long talk with him, but Ninkei was in a bad mood. Because of his inexplicable vigilance, he directly refused and walked out of the cabin. Xian Zhilong walked to the window and watched Ninkei get off the warship and walk along the lake shore to another warship. Xian Zhilong raised his eyebrows and his eyes revealed a complicated emotion. The House of Red Sleeves Song and Dance Troupe traveled with the Tang Empire's official delegation, so it was naturally convenient. Especially after Ninkei showed his attitude, the girls were treated even better. They were arranged to have their own warship. Where there were girls, there would be liveliness. But today, the ship was extremely quiet. The beautiful girls were sitting obediently in their chairs. They seemed to be looking down, but in fact, they could not suppress the curiosity in their hearts. They kept glancing at the 2 girls who were talking with the corner of their eyes. Xiao Xiao held Song Song's hand and pouted. She looked like a duckling looking for fish in the reeds. She said pitifully, "This is the first time I left Chong, and you did not accompany me. Do you still treat me as a friend?" Sang Sing only had 3 friends in Chong, and they were Li Yu, the princess of the Tang Empire, Tang Xiaodang, a girl from the Devil's Doctrine, and Xiao Qiao. These 3 friends were very different in status, but she had never considered these things and treated each of them sincerely. She felt sorry for being complained by Xiao Qiao and explained helplessly, "Young master likes peace and quiet. I can't do anything about it. You are already engaged. How can there be a young master?" Xiao Qiao looked at her and said angrily, "You have to understand your current status. If you keep calling him young master, that guy will really order you around like a handmaiden." Sang Sang thought to herself that although they were engaged, there was no difference between life and the past. She was used to calling him young master over the past few years. She was not used to calling him by his name. The girls in the cabin finally confirmed their guesses and confirmed Song Song's identity. They also guessed who the guy Xiao Qiao was talking about was. They were shocked and could not suppress their excitement. As the saying goes, there are always beauties in every generation. The girls in the House of Red Sleeves had a good income, and it was easy for them to get out of the registry. Hence, they changed quickly. Lu Shui's group had already married or entered into business. The girls who went to the Lang Temple this time were all very young. They had heard of the legendary stories of the House of Red Sleeves, but they had never seen it with their own eyes. It was not until they saw how intimate Xiao Qiao was with the dark-skinned girl that they were shocked to confirm that the rumors were true. Sang Sang was no longer the inconspicuous handmaiden in the old brush pen shop. Even if the people in Chong and did not know that she was the successor of the divine priest of light, they knew that she was the closest to the princess. They also knew that she was the missing daughter of Zheng Jing, the grand secretary of the Imperial Library. Of course, the most famous identity for Sang Sang was her relationship with Ning Quebec. The engagement between Ning Ke and Sang Sang was undoubtedly the most sensational event in Chong in the past 6 months. One was a student of the 2nd floor of the academy, the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy, and also a great calligrapher who was favored by His Majesty. The other was the daughter of Zheng Jing, the grand secretary of the princess, and also the successor of the divine priest. Although it was a simple engagement, it still caused a stir. His Majesty gave them countless gold, silver, and jewelry, and countless ministers came in person. For some people who did not know the inside story, the most shocking scene of the day happened when the West Hill Divine Palace specially sent a senior divine priest to congratulate them and presented them with countless makeup boxes. The senior brothers and sisters in the back of the mountain of the academy naturally had gifts, but in Ning Ke's eyes, those extremely poor things were not worth mentioning. However, he did not expect that the headmaster of the academy would be the poorest one. He did not even bother to write any words like beautiful girl, and only gave a box of sweet pastries. That guy? Which guy? Ning Ke walked into the cabin and looked at Xiao Qiao. He said, "Aunt Jian treats you well, and even let you be the foreman. But don't think that you can climb over my head just because you have her support." Xiao Qiao snorted and did not want to talk to him. She just held Song Song's hand tightly. The girls in the cabin guessed his identity and hurriedly stood up and bowed to him. For a moment, the flowers were slightly fluttering and the fragrance was floating. Thinking of the identity and status of this young man, especially the reputation of the great calligrapher, the beautiful girl's eyes gradually became misty and passionate, and they were quite eager to give it a try. Xiao Qiao looked at the somewhat chaotic scene and slightly frowned. She said, "Don't think too much. Go back and ask the sisters in the brothel who can really get close to Ning Quebec. All the girls in Chong and are not allowed to receive him. This is the iron rule set by Mistress Jian." This iron rule had long become a joke in the House of Red Sleeves, and even in the brothel industry in Chong. And how could the girls not know this reason? But thinking that they were already out of Chong, and would spend many days in the same boat with Ning Ke on the Great Lake, how could they bear to miss such an opportunity? So their eyes were still blazing. Xiao Qiao looked at Ning Ke and said helplessly, "You are a man with a wife. Can't you be more low-key? So please don't always hold my wife's hand." Ning-Ke walked forward with a smile, grabbed Song Song's hand, and took her out of the cabin. The sound of the lake waves gradually stopped, the oil lamp in the cabin dimmed, and the ink on the table swayed gently. The warship left the dock and slowly sailed to the vast Great Lake. Ning-Ke looked at the thin letter on the table, and no one knew what he was thinking. Sang Sang looked at the letter in his hand and said seriously, "This is ours." That letter was left by Cui Shi in the inn in Yangwon City before he left a few days ago. The letter was very thin, and there were only 2 pieces of paper in it. A few simple words were written on one piece of paper, and a banknote of 500,000 taels of silver on the other piece of paper. "I know there will be a double payment tomorrow, starting from the early morning. Please vote for me, just like you voted for Sang Sang. However, there will be no outbreak tomorrow, and there will be no outbreak during the double payment period, and there may even be a break in chapters. I have been sitting from morning to night to write a chapter, and it is really uncomfortable. I will try my best to write. Thank you." To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 515. I recommend a new book titled Fairy Mountain. The author is an old friend of mine. His writing is skillful and the plot is wonderful. I can guarantee his reputation. You can go and have a look or keep it. You will not lose out. The Cui family was generous enough to give her 500,000 taels of silver on their first meeting. It was hard to imagine. Such a large amount of silver was enough to do many things in the world. Sang Sang did not know why the Cui family had sent so much silver, but she knew that if Ning-Ke accepted it, he would be in big trouble. However, she did not even think about it and thought that he should accept it. This was 500,000 taels of silver. She had never seen so much money in her life. Don't accept it? We will be punished by God like Mr. Ko. Ning-Ke read the letter and knew the Cui family's intention. He explained, "Your father's first wife is Cui Shi's cousin. She is now in Qinghe Prefecture. That year, it was this woman who sent you out of the Zeng mansion with the intention of killing you. The Cui family gave you this silver to ask you to forgive that woman, or at least not implicate the Cui family. Therefore, this silver is not ours, but yours." Sang Sang was slightly stunned and said, "This is worth 500,000 taels of silver?" Ning-Ke said, "If you were the daughter of the Grand Secretary Zeng Jing, 500,000 taels of silver would be a bit expensive. But now you're the successor of the Divine Priest of Light. In the future, if you remember these things, even the aristocratic families in Qinghe Prefecture will not want to face the anger of the great Divine Priest of West Hill." After understanding the origin of this thin note, Sang Sang became a little hesitant. She looked at Ning-Ke and asked seriously, "Then do you think I should accept it?" Ning-Ke said, "It depends on whether you want to forgive them." Sang Sang said, "Of course I won't forgive them, but I don't want to find that woman for revenge." Ning-Ke was slightly surprised and asked, "Why?" Sang Sang said, "Because without that woman, I would not have been found by you." Ning-Ke laughed and said, "If that is the case, then keep the note and let the Cui family feel at ease." Sang Sang said worriedly, "Will it cause any trouble?" Ning-Ke said, "What trouble can there be?" Sang Sang said, "Isn't it said that if you accept money from others, your hands will be short?" Ning-Ke raised his right hand and said, "My hand won't become shorter. This silver is just to buy you to calm your anger. If the aristocratic families in Qinghe County really want to use this money to buy me to do something, do you think I'll just do it obediently?" Sang Sang said worriedly, "It's not good to take the money and do nothing, right?" Ning-Ke looked at her and asked, "Is money more important or credibility?" Sang Sang thought for a moment and said, "It depends on how much money it is." Ning-Ke gently waved the thin silver note in his hand. Sang Sang looked at the notes between his fingers and said, without hesitation, "This is more important." Then she came to her senses and said awkwardly, "Is it a disease to love money so much?" Ning-Ke said, "Loving money is not a disease because not having money is fatal. In fact, there was no need for any reason at all. Whether it was him or Sang Sang, it was impossible for them to return the 500,000 taels of silver notes that they had received, even if it involved something more troublesome than Qinghe County, even if they had to pay the price of credibility and honor. That was because they had suffered enough from not having money since they were young. Their love or greed for money had long become an inviolable instinct. If this was a disease, then they would definitely not be willing to cure it. Due to the difficult life they had since childhood, Ning-Ke and Sang-Sang had developed some instinctive living habits. Apart from their love of money, they were also sensitive to danger and would jump away like rabbits if they could foresee trouble in advance. They would never cause any trouble, which were also some of the most distinctive habits. Therefore, in the following days, Ning-Ke did not leave the cabin as the battleship slowly moved south on the surface of the Great Swamp. Xianzhilong's ship invited him several times, but he gently but firmly refused. Xianzhilong was not a simple person. That was why he had so simply revealed his camp and thoughts to Ning-Ke in the conversation that day. The more complicated he was, the more Ning-Ke did not want to communicate with him, because he did not want to participate in the important matter of the succession of the Tang Empire's throne. As a representative of the Academy entering the human realm, he was qualified to express his opinion on the succession of the Tang Empire's throne. However, he did not have any opinion. His only opinion was that the current emperor was so wise that he could choose whoever he wanted to succeed the throne in the future. As for whether the Academy should play a role in it, or whether it needed to gain some kind of benefit from it, the Academy really did not need it. No matter who became the Tang Empire's emperor in the future, he must maintain respect for the Academy. Moreover, Ning-Ke really did not care which prince would be able to sit on the dragon throne in the future. The core disciples of the headmaster of Academy, who were on the second floor, naturally stood higher than the people on the ground. They could see further and did not care about the red dust that was gradually blown up by the wind. What Ning-Ke cared about now had gradually gone beyond the scope of the human world and entered the realm of the outside world. It had become something that was unknown to the world but would affect the entire world. For example, the underworld invasion. For example, the rumor that he was the son of Yama. For example, Sang-Sang's illness. It was already autumn. The autumn wind, which should have been clear and slightly dry, was steamed by the boundless waters of the Great Swamp. It was moist and refreshing when it entered the window. Ning-Ke looked at the lines that looked like cursive characters on the fu paper slowly forming. With his sharp eyes, he confirmed that the black gold powder mixed in the fu ink was evenly distributed in the lines. He put the brush in his hand on the inkstone and turned to look at the lake outside the window. He was silent, and no one knew what he was thinking. The more he thought about the unknown, the more vigilant he became. He always felt that something was happening in the unseen world, and that it seemed to be related to himself and the Academy. Because the words in the unseen world were too ecstatic, he once again thought of the legend of the underworld invasion. Even the headmaster of Academy could not find the passage of the light of Buddha to suppress the underworld in the Lang Temple. He thought that it was even more impossible for him to find it. But what if he was really the son of Yama? The rumor about Ning-Ke's identity had already spread in the world. He did not know what the Vedantas of the Buddhism sect who had wanted to kill him would do now, nor did he know what was waiting for him in the Lang Temple. As the lake water gently swayed, they got closer to the Lang Temple. He became more and more silent. If he acted according to his instincts, because of the growing vigilance or strange omen in his heart, Ning-Ke might not hesitate to take Sang-Sang to stop the journey and return to Chong, and as soon as possible. But he did not do so. Instead, he let the fleet speed up, because Sang-Sang's illness suddenly relapsed. When they left Chong, and Sang-Sang's cold illness seemed to have healed, she went all the way south to bask in the sun, and it seemed that even the root of the illness was gone. But after they boarded the ship, Ning-Ke was surprised to find that the pair of little feet in his arms every night were getting colder and colder. What made him even more uneasy was that basking in the sun and cultivating divine skills seemed to be unable to effectively suppress the cold qi in Sang-Sang's body. Sang-Sang did not feel the changes in her body, or she felt it, but she was worried that Ning-Ke would be worried, so she did not say anything and continued, as usual, every day. Ning-Ke was worried that she would be worried, so he did not tell her. He began to pay attention to whether his wine bag was full. Every night, he quietly untied his clothes and placed Song Song's cold little feet in the warmest place. Then he began to think about what the headmaster had said before he left. Only now did he understand why the headmaster wanted him to take Sang Sang to the Lang Temple. It seemed that only the elders of the Buddhism sect who lived in seclusion could cure Sang Sang. Because he understood, he did not understand. He could not understand why even the West Hill Divine Palace and the Academy could not cure Sang Sang. Was it still an illness that the headmaster could not cure? Since he could not understand, Ning Ke stopped thinking about it. Anyway, no matter what the process was, the final result was already determined. He had to cure Sang Sang, and then he had to go to the Lang Temple to face the mercy or thunder of the Buddhism sect. He might even have to face the moment when his identity as the son of Yama was confirmed. Walking in the great swamp, facing the lake wind, the surface of the water was dotted with white stars, and seagulls occasionally flew by. Under the double pressure of vigilance against the unknown and worry about Song Song's health, Ning Ke cultivated silently. He kept writing talismans, meditating, and cultivating the Great Spirit every day. Amidst the light of the lake, the originally indistinct threshold seemed to have become a little closer, a little clearer. In the world, what people had to do often meant an opportunity for a breakthrough. For Ning Ke, there were only a few things in the world that he had to do, such as Song Song's safety. Longqing threatened him with Sang Sang at the Daming Lake in the wilderness, and he broke into the see-through state. Then he shot Longqing, who was about to enter the knowing destiny state, into a cripple. Now in the great swamp in autumn, he once again encountered an opportunity to break into the knowing destiny state. But this time, he did not even notice it. As the saying goes, a country in chaos produces a loyal minister and a poet in grief and indignation. Sang Sang could help Ning Ke break out of the state. In the depths of the West Hill Mountains, far away from the great swamp, Prince Longqing was also waiting for his own opportunity. He did not know if the opportunity would appear or when it would appear, but he believed that the Abbey Dean had saved him from the state of the living dead by the South Sea and sent him to the Jishou Abbey, which was regarded as a holy land by all cultivators in the world, was a great opportunity for him. Coming to the Jishou Abbey allowed him to see the possibility of becoming a powerhouse again. It allowed him to vaguely find a chance for success and ignited his burning desire. He thought that this was an opportunity because these were what he thought in his heart, and all the thoughts in his heart were the will of Hao Yin. However, there was always a distance between reality and ideal. Just like when he was collecting fish at the fishing port in the South Sea, he saw the wooden plank between the fishing boat and the dock. It seemed that he could easily board the fishing boat as long as he walked on it. But in fact, the plank was full of slippery fish scales and internal organs, and it was easy to slip and fall into the sea. Longqing wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He knew that another of his ribs had been broken. He looked at the horrifying old Taoist priest who had only half of his body left on the snow couch. The old Taoist priest was screaming and seemed like he could beat him to death at any time. Pain and confusion appeared in his eyes. How long would his life as a servant last? Where was the opportunity? To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.